Welcome to Dark Story Chronicles, where fear has a voice and every shadow tells a story. This is our first descent into darkness, and it's only the beginning. So before we begin, subscribe and join those brave enough to listen. Because once you enter, there's no turning back.
The elevator descended for what felt like an eternity. I watched the digital counter tick past level 5, then level 6, then deeper still into numbers I wasn't supposed to know existed. Beside me, Silas stood rigid in his tactical gear, his jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscle twitching beneath his stubbled cheek. Neither of us spoke. The briefing had been clear. No unnecessary communication, no questions, and above all, no deviation from protocol. We were part of a classified unit operating under the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, though even that designation was just another layer of misdirection. Our real employer had no name, no official documentation, and certainly no congressional oversight. For the past 3 years, Silas and I had been partners in operations that officially never happened, in places that officially didn't exist. We'd seen things in those underground facilities that would make most people question their sanity. But Dulce Base, buried deep beneath the high desert mesas of New Mexico, was different. Even among the black sites, Dulce was spoken about in whispers. The elevator shuddered to a stop at level 7. The doors opened with a pneumatic hiss, revealing a concrete corridor bathed in harsh fluorescent light. The air that rushed in was cold and carried a smell I couldn't quite place. Something organic and wrong, like meat left too long in a freezer. "Equipment check," Silas muttered, his voice barely audible. His hand moved instinctively to his sidearm, then to the various instruments clipped to his tactical vest. I did the same, my fingers finding the cold metal of my weapon, the radio, the emergency beacon that would supposedly bring extraction if things went sideways. Supposedly. Our commanding officer, a man we knew only as Graves, had given us our orders 6 hours earlier in a windowless room at Kirtland Air Force Base. "Level 7 has gone dark," he'd said, his face expressionless. "We lost contact with research team Delta 4 48 hours ago. Their last transmission was incomplete. Your objective is simple. You will reach the research laboratory in Section 7D, secure any surviving personnel, and extract all data from the main server. Under no circumstances are you to engage with any experimental subjects you may encounter. Is that understood?" But I wanted to ask what kind of experimental subjects required armed special operations soldiers for a simple data recovery mission. But I knew better. In our line of work, questions led to reassignment, and reassignment meant disappearing into some other black site where the questions were asked of you instead. Silas moved forward first, his rifle raised to a low-ready position. I followed, maintaining standard tactical spacing. The corridor stretched ahead of us, perfectly straight, and lined with heavy steel doors every 20 meters. Small windows reinforced with wire mesh offered glimpses into darkened rooms beyond. As we passed the first door, I glanced inside and immediately wished I hadn't. The room was an observation chamber of some kind, filled with monitoring equipment and metal chairs with restraints that had been torn apart. The metal twisted and rent as if by something impossibly strong. "Keep moving," Silas whispered, but I heard the tremor in his voice. We encountered the first body at the intersection of 2 corridors. Dr. Sarah Chen, according to the ID badge still clipped to her torn lab coat. I'd seen death before, plenty of it, but this was different. Her body was impossibly thin, as if something had consumed her from the inside out, leaving only a withered husk. Her face was frozen in an expression of pure terror, her mouth open in a silent scream, and her eyes... Jesus Christ, I breathed. Silas knelt beside the body, his gloved hand hovering over her ID badge but not touching it. Her badge shows she accessed Lab 7D 6 hours before we lost contact. She was running. He pointed to her feet, still clad in sensible laboratory shoes. The soles were worn and scuffed, and a trail of similar scuff marks led away down the eastern corridor. She was running from something, I corrected.
The sound echoed through the corridor, then distant but unmistakable. It was a clicking noise, rapid and irregular, like fingernails tapping on metal, but deeper, resonating in a way that made my teeth ache. Silas and I locked eyes, and I saw my own fear reflected back at me. "Radio check," Silas said, keying his mic. "Topside, this is Ground Team Alpha. We've located one casualty and are proceeding to primary objective. Be advised, we're hearing unidentified sounds on level 7. Request clarification on the nature of experimental subjects housed in this section. Over." Static answered us. Then after a long moment, Graves's voice came through, distorted and barely audible. "Ground Team Alpha, subjects are classified. Do not engage. Repeat, do not." The transmission dissolved into static. The clicking sound came again, closer this time, and with it came something else. A voice, thin and ready, speaking words I couldn't quite make out. It sounded like English, but wrong somehow. The syllables stretched and twisted into shapes that hurt to hear. "Move," Silas commanded, and we advanced quickly toward Lab 7D. The corridor seemed to stretch on forever, the fluorescent lights flickering now, casting dancing shadows that played tricks on my peripheral vision. I kept seeing movement where there shouldn't be any, kept feeling like something was walking parallel to us, just beyond the walls. We reached Lab 7D's entrance, a massive blast door that stood partially open. The steel was scored with deep gouges, 4 parallel lines that looked disturbingly like claw marks, except each groove was easily 3 inches deep. Whatever had made those marks possessed strength far beyond any human capability. "Breach protocol," Silas said, positioning himself beside the door. I took the opposite side, my rifle trained on the gap. On his count, we pushed through. The laboratory was in ruins. Computer terminals were smashed, their screens shattered and sparking. File cabinets had been torn open, their contents scattered across the floor in a blizzard of classified documents. In the center of the room stood a massive cylindrical chamber, perhaps 20 feet tall and 10 feet in diameter, constructed of reinforced glass and steel. The glass was frosted with ice, and through it I could see a dark shape suspended in some kind of fluid. The chamber door hung open. The fluid had drained away, leaving only frozen puddles on the floor. "Empty," I said, my voice barely a whisper. Silas moved toward the main computer terminal, the only one still functioning. Its screen glowed with an eerie blue light, displaying lines of data that scrolled past too quickly to read. "I need to download this," he said, pulling a portable drive from his vest. "Cover me." I positioned myself facing the open door, every nerve ending on fire. The clicking sound had stopped, and somehow that was worse than if it had continued. The silence felt pregnant with malevolence, as if the entire facility was holding its breath. The computer beeped, and Silas cursed under his breath. "This is going to take 5 minutes. The encryption is military grade." "We might not have 5 minutes," I replied, my eyes scanning the darkness beyond the doorway. That's when I saw it. A figure standing in the corridor, just beyond the reach of the laboratory's light. It was tall, impossibly tall, its head nearly touching the 8-foot ceiling. Its body was emaciated, all jutting bones and taut skin the color of old paper.
But it was the antlers that made my blood run cold, massive and branching, like those of an elk, but wrong, twisted, covered in frost and decorated with strips of fabric that might have once been human beings. The Wendigo tilted its head, regarding me with eyes that glowed with a pale, hungry light. Then it smiled, revealing rows of needle-sharp teeth, and spoke in that reedy, painful voice. "So hungry, so very hungry." I fired without thinking, 3 controlled bursts from my rifle. The muzzle flash lit up the corridor in stark relief, and I saw the creature clearly for perhaps a half second. That was enough. The bullet struck its chest, center mass, perfect grouping, exactly as we'd trained for thousands of hours. The Wendigo staggered backward 1 step, looked down at the wounds that wept not blood but something dark and oily, and then it laughed. The sound was like breaking glass mixed with wind howling through dead trees. It echoed through the corridors of level 7, seeming to come from everywhere at once. The creature moved then, faster than anything that size should be able to move, faster than anything living had a right to move. One moment it was 30 feet away in the corridor. The next it was gone, vanished into the darkness. "Silas, we need to go, now!" 3 more minutes, he said, his voice steady despite the terror I knew he must be feeling. That was Silas, always focused, always mission-oriented, even when everything was falling apart. If we leave without this data, everything that happened here, all these deaths, they mean nothing. I backed into the laboratory, keeping my rifle trained on the doorway. My heart hammered against my ribs so hard I thought it might break through. Every shadow seemed to writhe with malevolent intent. The temperature had dropped significantly. I could see my breath misting in the air, could feel the cold seeping through my tactical gear. A new sound joined the oppressive silence, scratching like something with very long claws dragging them along metal. It came from above us. I looked up at the ceiling tiles and saw them shifting, bulging downward. Dust and debris rained down as something moved through the crawl space above. "Silas!" I said, my voice tight with barely controlled panic. "It's in the ceiling!" 2 minutes. The scratching stopped. In the sudden silence I heard breathing, deep and rattling, the sound of air moving through a throat that wasn't quite human. The smell hit me then, that same organic wrongness from the elevator, but magnified 1,000-fold. It was the smell of ancient hunger, of winter starvation, of frozen corpses and desperate cannibalism. The ceiling tile directly above the computer terminal exploded downward. The Wendigo dropped into the laboratory in a shower of debris and dust, landing in a crouch between Silas and me. Up close, it was even more horrifying than I had imagined. Its skin was stretched so tight over its skeletal frame that I could see every bone, every ridge and hollow. Its fingers were tipped with black claws easily 6 inches long. Those antlers, I realized with dawning horror, weren't just decorated with strips of fabric. They were adorned with strips of flesh, with pieces of what had once been human beings. "Run!" Silas shouted, but I was already moving, diving to the side. As the creature's arms swept through the space where I'd been standing, I felt the wind of its passage, felt how close I'd come to being gutted by those terrible claws. Silas pulled his sidearm and fired point blank into the creature's head. The gun thundered in the enclosed space, and I saw the bullet strike the Wendigo's temple, saw the impact crater it left behind. The creature didn't even flinch. Instead, it turned its attention to Silas, and that hungry light in its eyes intensified. "Meat," it whispered, its voice filled with such longing that it made my skin crawl. "Fresh meat, warm meat, so long." I fired again, emptying my magazine into the creature's back. It spun toward me with impossible speed, and I saw that the bullets had done nothing except make it angry. The wounds were already closing, the flesh knitting back together with wet, sucking sounds. "The data!" Silas shouted. He'd grabbed the portable drive from the computer and was sprinting toward a second exit on the far side of the laboratory, one I hadn't noticed before. "This way!" The Wendigo moved to intercept him, but I threw myself at the creature, tackling it low. It was like hitting a steel beam wrapped in frozen leather. The impact drove the air from my lungs, and I felt something in my shoulder pop painfully, but I'd bought Silas a few seconds. The creature looked down at me, its face close enough that I could see my reflection in its pale, glowing eyes. Its breath was cold enough to burn, and when it opened its mouth, I saw that its teeth went back impossibly far, row after row
of them disappearing into a throat that seemed to have no end. "You will feed me," it said, each word deliberate and filled with promise. Then Silas was there, ramming something into the creature's side. I saw sparks, smelled burning ozone, and the Wendigo shrieked. It was an industrial cattle prod pulled from a rack of equipment near the open cylinder chamber. The creature recoiled, releasing me, and Silas grabbed my tactical vest, hauling me to my feet. We ran. The laboratory had multiple exits, a safety feature required by federal regulations, even in classified facilities. The one Silas had found led to a maintenance corridor, narrow and dimly lit, with pipes running along the ceiling and walls. We sprinted down it, our boots clanging on the metal grating floor. Behind us, I could hear the Wendigo recovering, could hear its claws scraping against metal as it pursued us. "Briefing," I gasped as we ran. "Graves said not to engage the experimental subjects. He knew what was down here." "Not just one subject," Silas panted. "Did you see the documentation in the lab? Project Hunger. They've been studying this thing for months, trying to understand how it converts biological matter into energy, how it survives in sub-zero temperatures, how it heals from any wound. They wanted to weaponize it." The corridor branched, and Silas went left without hesitation. I followed, trusting his instincts. We'd been partners long enough that I knew when he had a plan. "The chamber we saw," he continued, "it wasn't a containment unit. It was a starvation chamber. They were keeping it weak, controllable, but someone opened it. Someone let it feed." We burst through a door into what looked like a break room, complete with tables, vending machines, and a small kitchenette. The normality of it was jarring after the horror of the laboratory. But the normality was an illusion. The tables were overturned, and there were more bodies here, 3 of them, all in the same withered state as Dr. Chen. "It doesn't just kill them," I realized. "It eats their life force, drains them completely." A roar echoed through the facility, so loud and full of rage that it made the walls vibrate. The Wendigo was close and closing fast. Silas moved to the far wall where an emergency map was posted. He studied it for perhaps 3 seconds, then pulled out a knife and started prying open a panel beneath the map. "Ventilation system," he explained. "These old facilities all have the same basic layout. If we can reach the main ventilation shaft, we can climb up to level 6. From there, we might be able to reach the emergency stairs." The panel came free, revealing a duct, perhaps 2 feet square. Tight, but manageable. The sound of claws on metal was getting closer. We could hear the creature's breathing now, that rattling, hungry sound. "Go," Silas ordered. "I'll cover you, then follow." I squeezed into the duct, my tactical gear scraping against the metal sides. The space was dark and claustrophobic, but it beat the alternative. I crawled forward as fast as I could, my headlamp illuminating perhaps 10 feet ahead. Behind me, I heard Silas fire his weapon, heard the creature's answering shriek, then I heard him scrambling into the duct, heard his labored breathing as he followed. "Keep moving," he shouted. "It's right behind me." The duct branched and I went up, climbing a vertical shaft hand over hand.
My shoulders screamed in protest, but adrenaline pushed me forward. I could hear metal tearing below, could hear the Wendigo forcing its way into the ventilation system. The creature was too large for the space, but it was making itself fit, its bones cracking and reforming, its body compressing in ways that defied biology. We climbed for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. My hands were raw and bleeding, my muscles screaming. Finally, we reached a horizontal section and I could see light ahead. Actual light from level 6. We emerged into another corridor, this one blessedly empty. As Silas pulled himself out of the vent, I grabbed his arm. "The emergency stairs are this way," I said, pointing. "I remember from the brief." The vent behind us exploded outward. The Wendigo emerged, its body reforming, bones cracking back into place. It was bleeding now, that dark, oily substance dripping from numerous wounds. But it didn't seem to care. Its eyes found us, and it smiled, that terrible smile. No escape. Feed. Must feed. We ran again, racing toward the emergency stairwell. I could see the door ahead, bright red with the universal symbol for emergency exit. So close. Behind us, the clicking of claws on concrete grew louder. Silas reached the door first and slammed his shoulder into the crash bar. It didn't budge. He tried again, then looked at me with eyes full of despair. "It's locked," he said. "They locked down the entire level." The Wendigo was 30 feet away now, walking slowly, savoring our fear. It knew we had nowhere left to run. "There," Silas said suddenly, pointing to an unmarked door across from the emergency exit. "Hazmat storage. These facilities always have them near the stairwells." We moved together, reaching the door just as the Wendigo lunged. I felt its claws rape across my back, felt the searing pain and the warmth of blood. But we were through the door, and Silas was slamming it shut, engaging the heavy lock. The creature hit the door a moment later with enough force to buckle the metal. The entire frame groaned. It wouldn't hold long. The hazmat storage room was small, maybe 12 by 12 feet, lined with shelves containing protective suits, air tanks, and various sealed containers marked with biohazard and chemical warnings. Silas was already moving, scanning the shelves with desperate intensity. "Help me look," he commanded. "There has to be something we can use. These storage rooms always have fire suppressant systems, chemical neutralizers, something." I joined him, pulling containers off shelves, my injured back protesting every movement. The door shuttered again, and I saw the metal beginning to tear. Those terrible claws were punching through, creating holes we could see the Wendigo's glowing eyes through. "The briefing said it survives in sub-zero temperatures," I said out loud. "What if extreme heat would work? Fire in an enclosed facility, 7 levels underground?" Silas headed his no. "We'd kill ourselves faster than we'd kill that thing." Another impact. The door was barely holding now. Through the gaps we could hear the creature's voice, that reedy whisper that set my teeth on edge. "Hungry, so hungry. Let me in. Let me feed. You want to let me in? You're so tired. Rest now. Rest and feed me." There was something hypnotic about its voice, something that made part of my brain want to obey, to submit to the inevitable. I shook my head violently, trying to clear the fog that was creeping into my thoughts. "Silas," I said, my voice sounding distant to my own ears, "I think it's getting in our heads. Some kind of psychic influence." He looked at me and I saw that his eyes were glazed, unfocused. Maybe we should just let it in. How bad could it be? We're dead anyway. At least this way it'll be quick." I slapped him hard. The sharp crack of flesh on flesh echoed in the small room. He blinked, clarity returning to his eyes. "Thanks," he muttered. "I needed that." The door finally gave way with a shriek of tortured metal. The Wendigo stood in the doorway, too tall for the frame, having to duck its antlered head to enter. In the harsh fluorescent light of the storage room, it looked even more horrifying. I could see now that its skin wasn't paper white, but covered in frost. Actual frost, as if its body temperature was below freezing. "No more running," it said, each word accompanied by a puff of frozen breath. "Feed, now, feed." Silas raised his cattle prod, but the charge had died. He threw it at the creature anyway, and it batted it aside with contemptuous ease. We backed up until we were pressed against the far wall, trapped like animals. The Wendigo entered the room fully, moving with deliberate slowness. It knew we couldn't escape. It was savoring our fear, feeding on it, just as it would soon feed on our life force. That's when I saw it. A bright yellow container on the shelf beside me, marked with numerous warning symbols. Liquid nitrogen, used for rapidly freezing biological samples and for cooling emergency systems, stored under extreme pressure. "Silas, when I say now, hit the deck." I didn't wait for his response. I grabbed the container, which was surprisingly heavy, and hurled it at the Wendigo with all my remaining strength. The Wendigo caught it effortlessly in one clawed hand, looking at it with something like curiosity. "Now!" I shouted, and fired my sidearm. The bullet struck the container dead center. In the enclosed space, the explosion was deafening. The liquid nitrogen, kept under extreme pressure, flash froze everything in a 10-foot radius. The Wendigo's shriek of rage and pain was cut short as the supercooled gas engulfed it, as its already frozen flesh became even colder, as the moisture in the air crystallized around it. But liquid nitrogen wasn't enough to kill something that thrived in sub-zero temperatures. What killed it was the secondary effect. The
facilities like Dulce Base existed, hidden beneath the surface of America, harboring horrors that should never have been disturbed. Later, in the sterile debriefing room, a psychologist asked me if I was experiencing any unusual thoughts or feelings, any sense of being watched or followed. I lied and said no. But the truth was that every time I closed my eyes, I saw the Wendigo's glowing gaze. I heard its whispered words. So hungry, so very hungry. And the worst part, the part I couldn't tell anyone, not even Silas. Sometimes, in the quiet moments, I felt hungry too. Not for food, but for something else. Something I couldn't name. A hunger that started deep in my chest and radiated outward, making my bones ache and my skin feel too tight. The psychologist cleared me for duty, stamped my file with various classification marks, and sent me on my way. Silas and I were given 2 weeks' leave, then assigned to different units. We haven't spoken since. But sometimes late at night, I receive encrypted messages on a secure channel. They're always from Silas, and they always say the same thing. Do you feel it too? I never respond, because I'm afraid of what my answer would be. I'm afraid that the Wendigo didn't die in that hazmat storage room. I'm afraid that it did what Wendigos do. It passed on its curse, its eternal hunger, to those who confronted it. Some nights when the hunger grows strong, I stand in front of my bathroom mirror and look for signs of change. Are my teeth sharper? Is my skin paler? Are those the beginnings of antlers I see pressing against my skull? Or am I just going mad, driven insane by what I witnessed in the depths of Dulce Base? I don't know anymore. All I know is that the government files say I'm fit for duty, that I'm a decorated soldier with top-secret clearance who completed a successful extraction operation under hazardous conditions. The files say I'm fine, but the files are lying, because deep beneath the mesas of New Mexico, in a facility that officially doesn't exist, I left something behind. Maybe it was my sanity, maybe it was my soul, or maybe it was my humanity itself, consumed by a creature that fed not just on flesh, but on the very essence of life. The hunger grows stronger every day, and I'm starting to think that the real horror isn't what we found in Dulce Base. The real horror is what Dulce Base created in us. The monsters aren't just kept in underground facilities. Sometimes they're created there, and sometimes they walk out the front door wearing the uniform of the very people who were supposed to stop them. I am Soldier 47 Delta, assigned to Special Operations Unit Redacted. My service record is exemplary. My psychological evaluations are clean. And I am so very hungry.
Reverently, and its innards had been removed and placed in a neat pile at the base of the tower. This wasn't a predator kill. This was something else, something deliberate. I pulled out my camera and documented everything, my hands shaking so badly I had to brace the camera against my chest. Then I backed slowly toward my truck, keeping my eyes on the tree line, every shadow suddenly seeming to hide something large and watching. I was almost to the truck when I heard it. A branch snap, close and loud, then another. Something was moving through the forest, circling around behind me. I didn't wait. I jumped into the truck, slammed the door, and started the engine. As I threw it into reverse, I caught a glimpse of movement in my rearview mirror. Something tall and dark was standing at the edge of the clearing, watching me leave. It raised one long arm, almost like a wave or a warning. I drove back to the station, going 20 meters over the safe speed for those rough roads, not caring about the regulations. When I burst through the door, Thomas took one look at my face and reached for the radio. "What did you see?" he asked. I told him about the deer, the arrangement of its body, the presence I'd felt in the forest. Gabriel and Ezra gathered around as I spoke, their expressions growing grimmer with each detail. "North Sector, near the old fire tower?" Thomas asked. I nodded. "That's where Parker had his incident," Gabriel said. "Same area." Thomas rubbed his face with both hands, suddenly looking much older than his years. "We need to report this to the county sheriff. It might be—" "It's not human," I interrupted. "Whatever did that to that deer, it wasn't human. The strength it would take to impale a 150-pound animal on a metal beam 15 feet off the ground." "We still need to file a report," Thomas said. But I could see he believed me. They all did. That night, I didn't go back to my cabin. I stayed at the ranger station, dozing in an office chair while Gabrielle and Ezra took turns keeping watch. No one said it out loud, but we all knew. Something in the forest was escalating. Whatever had been content to stay hidden in the shadows was now making itself known, and it had chosen me to send its message to. Around 3 in the morning, I woke to the sound of scratching. It came from outside, from the walls of the station, a slow, deliberate scraping like claws on wood. We all heard it. We sat in the office with the lights off, weapons drawn, though what good a can of bear spray would do against something that could impale a deer 15 feet in the air, I didn't know. The scratching moved around the building, circling it methodically. Once, twice, 3 times. Then it stopped at the door. We could hear breathing on the other side, deep and wet, like lungs struggling with fluid. A smell seeped through the cracks, that same rotting stench from the clearing. The door handle rattled, once, twice, testing, then silence. When dawn finally broke, we ventured outside to investigate. The ground around the station was soft from recent rain, perfect for tracks. And there were tracks everywhere. They started at the tree line and made a complete circuit of the building. They looked almost human at first glance, 5 toes, a heel, an arch, but they were wrong. Too large, nearly 18 inches long. The toes ended in what looked like claw marks, and the depth of the prints suggested something that weighed at least 400 pounds, and they were everywhere, dozens of them, overlapping as if the creature had paced around the building multiple times, working itself up to try the door. Thomas crouched beside one particularly clear print and took several photographs. When he stood up, his face was pale. "I've been a ranger for 32 years, he said quietly. "I've seen bear tracks, wolf tracks, even mountain lion tracks where they're not supposed to be. But I've never seen anything like this." "What is it?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. Thomas looked toward the forest, toward the vast expanse of wilderness that stretched for hundreds of miles in all directions. The Menominee call it Kuwaku. The Ojibwe have a dozen different names for things that walk like men. But all the stories agree on one thing. They're old, older than our understanding, and they don't take kindly to intrusion. "You're saying we have Bigfoot wandering around the forest," I said, trying to inject some skepticism into my voice. But it sounded hollow even to my own ears. "I'm saying we have something," Thomas replied, "and it's interested in you." He was right. Over the next week, I would discover just how interested it was, and that the creature leaving tracks around our station was only the beginning. There were other things in those woods, older things, hungrier things. The true horror was just beginning. The county sheriff arrived the next morning, a weathered man named Connor Briggs, who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. He examined the photographs of the deer carcass and the tracks, listened to our statements, and spent a long time staring at nothing in particular. "I'll file the report," he finally said, "but between you and me, we both know what my bosses will say. Probably a bear, maybe someone's idea of a sick prank. They're not going to close the forest over some weird tracks." "Sheriff," Thomas began, but Connor held up his hand. "I believe you, Tom. I've lived in these parts my whole life. My grandfather used to tell stories about things in the woods. Said the old man warned his generation to stay away from certain areas when the moon was full. I thought they were just stories to keep kids from wandering off." He paused, adjusting his belt. "Then 3 years ago, we had a hiker go missing near Wabano. Search and rescue spent 2 weeks combing those woods. Never found him, but we found his backpack hanging from a tree branch 20 feet up. It had claw marks on it that didn't match any animal we know." "So what do we do?" I asked. Connor met my eyes. "You be careful. You carry proper communication equipment, and if something doesn't feel right, you trust your gut and get out." He glanced at Thomas. "How many people do you have working this forest right now?" "4 rangers, including him. We're understaffed." "Maybe that's for the best," Connor said quietly. "Fewer targets." After the sheriff left, I spent the rest of the day at the station, going through incident reports from the past 5 years. Thomas gave me access to everything, including files marked unexplained, that I suspected were never shared with the main forestry department. The pattern was disturbing. Every year, starting in late September and running through early November, there was a spike in strange occurrences. Hikers reported being followed by something large that stayed just out of sight. Camp cameras captured blurred images of figures that seemed too tall to be human. And campers abandoned their sites in the middle of the night, leaving behind tents and gear, some of them never returning to retrieve their belongings. "We've tried to rationalize it," Gabriel told me as I read through the files. "Coyotes, wolves, owls, even the wind through certain rock formations can create weird sounds. But every year it gets harder to explain away." "Why doesn't the Forestry Service do anything?" I asked. Gabriel laughed bitterly. What would they do? Call a press conference and announce that monsters are real? They'd rather bury the reports and blame budget cuts when people quit. Is that why you stay? I asked, despite all this? He was quiet for a moment. Someone has to. These are public lands. People come here with their families, their kids. If we're not here to watch, to warn people away from dangerous areas. He trailed off. I guess I stay because I have to believe we're making some kind of difference. I was scheduled to return to the northern sector the following Monday. Thomas tried to argue against it, wanted to send Gabriel instead, but we both knew that would solve nothing. Whatever was out there had shown interest in me specifically. Avoiding my assigned patrol would only delay the inevitable. The weekend passed in uneasy calm. I stayed at the station, going over maps and emergency protocols. I memorized the locations of every shelter, every logging road, every path that could lead me quickly back to civilization. I checked and rechecked my equipment: satellite phone, bear spray, whistle, first aid kit, emergency flares. Sunday night, I barely slept. Every sound outside my window made me jolt awake, my heart hammering. But morning came with nothing more than a light frost and the chatter of chickadees in the pines. Monday's patrol started smoothly. I avoided the old fire tower.
Sound that formed syllables, a deep rumbling that sounded almost like rune. I didn't need to be told twice. I scrambled into the truck, jammed the key in the ignition, and tore out of there. In my rearview mirror, I saw the creature watching me go. It didn't chase. It just sat there on its haunches, that terrible smile still on its face. I radioed Thomas before I'd even made it back to the main road. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the radio. Thomas, I need you to look up Dogman. Right now, tell me it's not real. There was a long pause. Where are you? Eastern Trail Sector, heading back. Thomas, I saw it. It walked upright. It smiled at me. I think it talked. Get back here now. Don't stop for anything. I made it back to the station in record time, nearly blowing out the truck suspension on the rough roads. Thomas, Gabriel, and Ezra were waiting for me. One look at my face told them everything. Dogman, Thomas said flatly. I nodded, still trying to catch my breath. That's what people call it, right? The Michigan Dogman? Michigan, Wisconsin, even reports from Minnesota. Gabriel said the sightings go back over 100 years. Most people think it's just a legend, a campfire story. But there are too many reports, too many consistent details. It's been seen around here before, Ezra added. He pulled out a file folder I hadn't seen yet. 3 years ago, a hunter reported seeing something that matched your description. Said it followed him for over an hour, staying just at the edge of his vision. When he finally made it back to his truck, he found scratches on the door handles. Deep scratches, like something had been trying to get in. I looked at the photographs in the file. The scratches were there, 4 parallel gouges in the metal. The hunter had tried to photograph the creature, but all he'd gotten was blurred images of something large and dark moving between trees. Why didn't anyone warn me? I asked, hearing the anger in my voice. We thought the activity was limited to the northern sector, Thomas said. The Bigfoot sightings have been concentrated there. We didn't expect... He stopped, running a hand through his gray hair. I'm sorry. We should have told you everything. What's everything? I demanded. What else is out there? The 3 of them exchanged glances. Finally, Thomas pulled out a map and spread it on the desk. The forest was marked with different colored pins. Red pins are Bigfoot sightings, he explained, all concentrated in the northern sector near the old fire tower. Yellow pins are Dogman reports. Those are more spread out, but mostly in the eastern sections. And the black pins? I asked, pointing to 3 markers in the northwestern corner of the forest. Thomas's expression darkened. Those are different. Those are the areas where hikers have gone missing. Not lost, not injured and unable to call for help. Missing. Completely vanished. How many? I whispered. 7. Over the past 15 years. Search and rescue found nothing. No bodies, no trace, nothing. What took them? Ezra spoke up, his voice quiet. The Ojibwe call it Wendigo, a winter spirit that hunts humans. It's supposed to be impossibly thin, tall enough to reach the treetops, and always hungry. The legend says it was once human, someone who resorted to cannibalism during a harsh winter. The act of eating human flesh transformed them into something else, something cursed to eternal hunger. That's just a legend, I said. But even I didn't believe my own words anymore. Maybe, Thomas said, but all 3 missing persons cases correspond with cold snaps in October or November, and in each case, other hikers in the area reported feeling an overwhelming sense of dread, of being watched by something that wanted them to run, to get separated from their groups. I looked at the map, at the constellation of pins marking encounters with things that shouldn't exist, the northern sector with its Bigfoot sightings, the eastern sections with the dogmen, and the northwestern corner marked with black pins like stars in a malevolent sky. We're surrounded, I said. Yes, Thomas agreed, and it's only going to get worse. These creatures, whatever they are, they're most active from now through November. Hunter season brings more people into the forest, more potential encounters, and based on the pattern of incidents, activity peaks around Halloween. We need to close the forest, I said. On what grounds? Thomas asked. Strange sightings? The Forestry Service would laugh us out of the room. Without concrete proof, without bodies or undeniable evidence, they'll never authorize a closure. These are public lands. People have a right to access them, even if it kills them. Thomas didn't have an answer for that. That evening, we held a meeting to establish new safety protocols. From now on, rangers would patrol in pairs when possible. We would check in every 2 hours via radio. Anyone who encountered something unusual was to photograph it if safe, then immediately retreat to their vehicle and return to the station. We also agreed to put up warning signs at major trailheads. Nothing too specific. We couldn't mention monsters without risking our jobs, but we could warn about aggressive wildlife and recommend that hikers travel in groups. It wasn't enough. We all knew it, but it was all we could do. I spent that night at the station again, unwilling to return to my isolated cabin. Around 2 a.m, I was dozing in the office when Gabriel shook me awake. "Listen," he whispered. At first, I heard nothing. Then, faint and distant, came the sound of howling. But this wasn't the wolf-like howling I'd heard before. This was deeper, more agonized, almost like screaming. It echoed through the forest, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The howling continued for nearly 10 minutes, rising and falling in pitch, sometimes forming sounds that could almost have been words. Then, as suddenly as it started, it stopped. In the silence that followed, I heard something else. Closer. Much closer. The sound of claws on gravel. Something was circling the station again, but this time we could see it through the windows. Not clearly, just a shadow, massive and hunched, moving on all fours with a loping, predatory grace. "The dogman," I breathed. "It followed you back," Ezra said. The creature completed 2 circuits of the building, then stopped at the door. We heard it sniffing, then a low growl that vibrated through the walls. The door handle jiggled once, twice, then we heard it move to the window. A massive head appeared in the glass, backlit by the security lights, silhouetted but unmistakable. The wolf-like snout pressed against the glass, fogging it with breath. Through the condensation, I could see the outline of too many teeth. Gabriel had his hand on his service weapon. Ezra was holding a fire axe. Thomas had his radio ready to call the sheriff. But we all knew none of it would matter if that thing decided to come through the window. For what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, the creature stared at us through the glass. Then, slowly, deliberately, it raised one hand, paw, whatever, and placed it against the glass. The pads pressed against the glass, and we could see the thick black claws, each one at least 3 inches long. It held that position for a moment, as if marking us, claiming us. Then it was gone, melting back into the darkness with barely a sound. We didn't sleep the rest of that night. At dawn, we found tracks around the building, canine prints, but massive, with claw marks that scored the ground. And at the window where it had pressed its hand, there was a smear on the glass. Gabriel collected a sample. It tested positive for saliva, dog saliva, but the DNA was wrong. The lab would later report that it was canine in origin, but didn't match any known species. The chromosomal structure was abnormal, showing markers that the lab technician said looked almost human. The lab technician quit 3 days later, refusing to discuss the results further. I think that's when we all truly understood what we were dealing with. These weren't just animals, weren't just cryptids from folklore. They were something else entirely, something that existed in the spaces between the known and unknown, the natural and supernatural. And they were hunting us. After the dogman's visit, Thomas tried to place me on administrative leave. He argued that I'd been through too much too quickly, that I needed.
But this felt different, more personal. The creature hadn't just been hunting, it had been playing with us, demonstrating that it knew things about us, that it could reach into our personal lives and use them against us. The mimicry is a known behavior, Thomas said, pulling up reports on his computer. Native American legends talk about it. The Wendigo supposedly mimics the voices of loved ones to lure people away from safety. And there are dogman reports from Michigan that mention hearing family members calling from the woods. How is that even possible, I asked. These things would have to be incredibly intelligent. Maybe they are, Gabriel suggested. Or maybe there's something we don't have a framework to understand, something that exists outside our normal categories of animal intelligence. That night, Thomas brought out a bottle of whiskey, and we all shared a drink. It wasn't much, but it helped steady our nerves. We talked about our families, our lives before becoming rangers, the reasons we'd chosen this career. It felt important to remind ourselves that we were human, that we had lives and people who cared about us beyond these woods. Around midnight, my phone rang. The caller ID showed my sister's number. I hadn't spoken to her in weeks. We'd had a falling out over something stupid, one of those family disagreements that festers because neither person wants to apologize first. "Hello," I answered. "Hey." Her voice sounded strange, flat. "I'm sorry about everything. I wanted to tell you I'm in the woods near your station. Can you come get me?" Every hair on my body stood up. "Sarah, where are you really?" "I told you. In the woods. I drove up to surprise you, but I got lost. Please, come get me." "What's Mom's middle name?" I asked. Silence on the line. Then, in a voice that was no longer quite human, "Come find me." The call ended. I was shaking so hard I nearly dropped the phone. "They're calling us now," I said. On our phones. Thomas's face went grim. Everyone, right now, call your families, verify they're safe, then turn off your phones. No more cell service. We spent the next hour making calls, confirming that our loved ones were exactly where they were supposed to be, nowhere near the forest. Then, one by one, we powered down our phones. It felt like cutting ourselves off from the world, but we had no choice. The question that haunted me was, how did these creatures get our phone numbers, our personal information? It suggested a level of intelligence and awareness that was truly terrifying. As if in response to our defensiveness, the activity escalated. That very night, we heard voices around the station. My sister's voice, Ezra's wife, Gabriel's teenage son, Thomas's late father. The creatures were using our own connections against us, trying to draw us out into the darkness. We huddled inside, weapons ready, listening to the voices of our loved ones begging us to come help them, to come outside, to just open the door. It went on for hours. The psychological torture of hearing someone you care about in distress, knowing it's not real, but still feeling the instinctive urge to help, was almost unbearable. Around 3 a.m, the voices stopped. The silence that followed was somehow worse. Then we heard new sounds. Scratching on the roof, the creak of footsteps on the wooden porch, the scrape of something testing the windows. Thomas got on the radio and called Connor, the sheriff. "We're under siege at the ranger station. We need backup." "Under siege by what?" Connor asked. "Just send someone now." It took 20 minutes for a deputy to arrive. By the time his cruiser pulled up, the sounds had stopped. The creatures had melted back into the forest. When we opened the door and stumbled out into the gray pre-dawn light, the deputy took one look at our faces and knew we hadn't imagined it. "You boys look like you've seen hell," he said. "Close enough," Thomas replied. We showed him the evidence: claw marks on the porch posts, scratches on the window frames, tracks in the soft ground around the building. The deputy documented everything, took photographs, and promised to file a report, but we all knew nothing would come of it. "You should close this forest," the deputy said before he left. "I don't know what's going on here, but it ain't natural. People are going to get hurt." "We're trying," Thomas said, "but we need more than tracks and scratches. We need something the bureaucrats can't ignore." The deputy nodded and drove away, leaving us alone with the forest and its secrets. Over the next week, we established a fortress mentality. We reinforced the station's windows with plywood, installed better exterior lighting, and organized round-the-clock watches. We stopped patrolling alone, always moving in pairs or groups, and we started carrying more than just bear spray. Thomas, it turned out, kept a shotgun in his office. Gabriel had a hunting rifle in his truck. Ezra carried a large knife that looked more like a small sword. I asked if they thought conventional weapons would work against these creatures. "Probably not," Thomas admitted, "but it makes us feel less helpless." The incident that finally pushed things to a breaking point came on October 25th. A group of high school students from Green Bay had gotten permission to do a biology project in the forest, studying fall migration patterns. They were supposed to stay on marked trails and check in every 3 hours. They missed their first check-in, then their second. By the third missed check-in, we were organizing a search party. We found their campsite just before dark. The tents were still set up, sleeping bags laid out, a portable stove still containing remnants of instant noodles. But the students were gone. All 5 of them vanished without a trace. What we found instead made my blood run cold. Arranged in a circle around the campsite were 5 piles of personal belongings: backpacks, phones, shoes, jackets. Each pile was identical in arrangement, as if carefully organized by the same entity. And, in the center of the circle, written in what looked like mud or ash, was a symbol I didn't recognize. "That's an Ojibwa warning marker," Ezra said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It means place of hunger. It's supposed to mark areas where the Wendigo hunts." Thomas got on the radio immediately, calling in every available resource: sheriff deputies, state police, volunteer search and rescue teams. Within 2 hours, we had 50 people combing through that section of forest. We found the students 3 hours later, 2 miles from their campsite. They were alive, but in a state of shock so profound that none of them could speak coherently. They were huddled together in a hollow between 2 fallen trees, covered in scratches and bruises, their clothes torn. The paramedics took them to the hospital. It would be 2 days before any of them could explain what happened. When they finally did, their story made national news, though most people assumed it was either a hoax or mass hysteria. They said something had come to their campsite after dark, something tall and impossibly thin, with antlers or branches protruding from its head. It had circled their camp, calling to them in voices they recognized: teachers, parents, friends. When they tried to run, it had herded them, driving them deeper into the forest like a predator, separating prey from the herd. For 3 hours they'd been pursued through the dark woods by something that moved between the trees with supernatural speed. Every time they tried to stop, every time they tried to hide, it found them. It didn't attack them, didn't harm them, beyond the scratches from running through undergrowth. It just chased them, wearing them down, feeding on their terror. When they finally collapsed from exhaustion, it stood over them, examining them with what one student described as eyes like black stars. Then, without explanation, it had left, just walked away into the forest, as if it had grown bored with its game. The incident made headlines. Group hysteria in Nicolet Forest, read one paper. Halloween prank goes too far, read another. The students were interviewed by skeptics and believers alike. The Forestry Service issued a statement about the dangers of camping in wilderness areas without proper supervision. But Thomas, Gabriel, Ezra, and I knew the truth. The Wendigo was real, and it was hunting in our forest. The question was, what were we going to do about it?
Paused, her expression grave. The Wendigo smells the fear in your hearts. It feeds on it. How do we make them stop? I asked. Ruth looked at me for a long moment. You don't. You either leave their territory or you prove you belong. You show them you respect the old ways, that you understand your place in the natural order. We can't just abandon the forest, Gabriel protested. Then you must make peace with them. Each one requires a different approach. Ruth pointed to the map, to the area around the old fire tower. The Kakwu is guardian of that place. Your metal tower offends it. You must remove it, or at least offer something in exchange for its presence. An offering? Thomas asked skeptically. Tobacco is traditional food, something that shows respect and acknowledgement of its territory. And the dog man? Ezra asked. Ruth's expression turned troubled. That one is trickier. The dog man is a trickster, a hunter who enjoys the game more than the kill. You must show it you're not easy prey. You must face it, stand your ground, but never, ever turn your back and run. That's what it wants us to do, I said, remembering my encounter. It told me to run. Ruth nodded, because the chase is what it craves. Deny it that, and it may lose interest, or... She paused. It may escalate. What about the Wendigo? Thomas asked. How do we deal with that? Ruth was quiet for a long time. The Wendigo cannot be appeased. It knows only hunger. The only way to survive the Wendigo is to avoid it entirely. Never go into its territory alone. Never in winter. And if you hear it calling with the voices of loved ones, you plug your ears and run toward light and warmth and the company of others. The students said it chased them for hours, I said. Why didn't it kill them? Perhaps it wasn't hungry enough yet. Or perhaps, Ruth's eyes grew distant. Perhaps it was making a point, reminding you that this forest has rules older than your laws. That evening, we formulated a plan. It was risky, possibly insane, but we couldn't keep living in a state of siege. We would address each creature in turn, following Ruth's guidance as best we could. The next morning, October 29th, we started with the kaku. Thomas, Nathaniel, Ruth, and I drove out to the old fire tower, bringing offerings as Ruth had instructed, tobacco, fruit, and a formal letter from the Forestry Service acknowledging the sacred nature of the land. The clearing around the fire tower felt different in daylight, less threatening, but somehow more watchful. The deer carcass had been removed weeks ago, but the air still carried that faint scent of decay and something else, something wild and ancient. Ruth performed a traditional blessing, speaking in Menominee while sprinkling tobacco around the base of the tower. She placed the fruit and the letter in a carefully arranged pile, then stepped back. "Now we wait," she said. We didn't have to wait long. Within minutes, we heard movement in the forest, heavy footfalls, deliberate and unhurried. Then it appeared at the tree line. The creature I'd glimpsed weeks ago, now visible in full daylight. It was massive, easily 8 feet tall, covered in reddish-brown hair. The face was distinctly ape-like, but with more human characteristics than any great ape I'd seen in zoos. The eyes, amber gold in the morning light, fixed with us with clear intelligence. The kaku looked at our offering, then at us. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then slowly, it approached the pile. It picked up the fruit, examined it, and took a bite. It seemed to consider the taste, then set the fruit down carefully. It ignored the tobacco, but picked up the letter, unfolded it with surprising dexterity, and appeared to study it. I have no idea if it could actually read, but it stared at that paper for a full minute before refolding it and placing it back on the pile. Then it did something extraordinary. It picked up a large stone, carried it to the base of the fire tower, and placed it deliberately. Then another stone, and another. "It's building a cairn," Nathaniel whispered. "A marker. It's accepting our acknowledgement and marking its territory in return." The creature completed its cairn. 5 stones stacked carefully, then looked at us once more. It didn't smile or make any human gesture, but something in its posture relaxed, became less threatening. Then it turned and walked back into the forest, disappearing as silently as it had come. "1 down," Thomas said, letting out a breath he'd been holding. 2 to go. The dogman was next, but that encounter would have to wait for nightfall, when the creature was most active. We spent the afternoon preparing, gathering equipment, and going over our plan. Gabriel would stay at the station as our safety net, monitoring our position via GPS and ready to call for help if needed. Ruth declined to come with us for this part, saying, "The dogman is not my medicine, so it would just be Thomas, Nathaniel, Ezra, and me." We chose a location in the eastern sector where dogman sightings had been most frequent. We set up portable lights, creating a circle of illumination in the dark forest. Then we waited. Night fell quickly, the temperature dropping below freezing. Our breath misted in the air. The forest around us grew silent, that unnatural silence that I'd come to associate with the presence of something predatory. Then we heard it. The sound of movement through the underbrush, circling our position, not trying to hide itself, but not revealing itself either, testing us. "Show yourself," I called out, my voice sounding small in the vast darkness. "We know you're there." The movement stopped.
Then, at the edge of our light, a figure emerged. The dogman standing upright on its hind legs, easily 7 feet tall. Its eyes reflected our lights, glowing amber in the darkness. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but I held my ground, remembering Ruth's words. Beside me, I could feel Thomas and Ezra doing the same, though Nathaniel had gone pale. The creature took a step forward, then another. It was testing us, seeing if we would break and run. Its lips pulled back in that terrible, not quite smile, revealing rows of teeth designed to tear flesh. "We're not prey," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "We're not playing your game. This is our territory too." The dogman tilted its head, that disturbingly dog-like gesture. Then it dropped to all fours and circled us, staying just at the edge of the light. We turned with it, never taking our eyes off it, maintaining our defensive formation. This went on for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. The creature would advance, we would stand firm. It would feint to one side, we would adjust our position. It was a contest of wills, a psychological battle. Finally, the dogman sat back on its haunches. It made a sound, a low rumbling, that might have been frustration or respect, or both. Then, incredibly, it seemed to nod, just once, a clear acknowledgement. And then, it was gone, vanishing into the darkness so quickly I might have imagined it was there at all. "Did that just happen?" Ezra asked, his shaking voice. "I think," Nathaniel said slowly, "it just accepted you as equals, as fellow predators, worthy of respect, rather than prey to be hunted." We packed up our equipment quickly and headed back to the station, adrenaline still surging through our veins. 2 down, but the hardest challenge still lay ahead, the Wendigo. We planned the Wendigo confrontation for Halloween night, October 31st. It seemed grimly appropriate, but as the day approached, Ruth grew increasingly agitated. "You don't understand what you're proposing. The Wendigo is not like the others. It's not a guardian or a predator. It's a spirit of hunger and winter. It exists only to consume." "We can't just leave it out there," Thomas argued. 5 students were terrorized. 7 people have gone missing over the years. How many more before we act? "Acting might make things worse," Ruth warned. "The Wendigo is drawn to those who seek it out. By going into its territory, by challenging it, you might provoke it into a frenzy." But we'd made our decision. Thomas had authorized a full-scale operation for that night. We spoke, and its voice was like wind through a graveyard, like the last breath of dying men. "Hungry," it said, "so hungry. You smell of life, of warmth. Give it to me." Ruth stepped forward, speaking rapidly in Menominee. She held up the sage bundle, now smoking, creating a barrier of scented smoke between us and the creature. The Wendigo recoiled slightly, its head jerking back. "You cannot have them," Ruth said in English. "They are protected by fire and by the old laws. You have no claim here." The Wendigo's jaw worked, grinding its teeth together with a sound like breaking bones. "The old laws are forgotten. The forest is empty. I grow stronger. Soon I will hunt beyond the trees, into the places of wood and brick. I will feed and feed until I am satisfied." "You will never be satisfied," Ruth replied. "That is your curse. That is why you are Wendigo."
The creature let out a shriek that sent ice crystals flying through the air. It began to circle our camp, moving with impossible speed, creating a whirlwind of cold that threatened to blow out our fire. We huddled together, feeding more wood to the flames, fighting against the supernatural winter the Windio had brought with it. "We need to drive it away," Thomas shouted over the howling wind. "Ruth, what do we do?" "Fire," she called back. "It fears fire, because fire is consumption that serves life, not death. Use your flares." We pulled out our emergency flares and lit them, creating points of red-hot light around our camp. The Wendigo shrieked again and withdrew, but only slightly. It began to speak in multiple voices now, cycling through all the people we loved, all the people we feared for, trying to find a weakness in our resolve. Then Jaden, the young deputy, made a mistake. He heard his daughter's voice crying in the darkness, and he ran, just took off into the trees before any of us could stop him. The Wendigo moved with horrifying speed. One moment it was circling our camp, the next it was gone, chasing Jaden into the darkness. We heard his screams, high and terrified, growing more distant. "We have to help him," Connor shouted, starting to follow. Ruth grabbed him. "That's what it wants. It's separating us, picking us off one by one. Stay together." But we couldn't just leave Jaden to die. Thomas made a decision. "Gabriel, Ezra, you stay here with Ruth and Nathaniel. Connor and I will go after Jaden. We'll use the GPS to track each other. If we're not back in 15 minutes, call for every available unit." "I'm coming too," I said. Thomas started to argue, then nodded. 3 is better than 2. We grabbed our gear and headed into the darkness, following the sound of Jaden's screams. The forest had become a maze of ice and shadow, the temperature so cold our fingers were already going numb. We moved as quickly as we dared, following the GPS signal on Jaden's tracker. We found him in a clearing about half a mile from camp. He was on his knees, staring up at the Wendigo, which loomed over him like a monument to hunger. The creature's hand, if you could call it that, more like a collection of bone and claw, was reaching down toward Jaden's face. "Get away from him!" I shouted, firing my flare gun directly at the creature. The flare hit the Wendigo in the chest, and it shrieked, stumbling back. For a moment I saw something incredible. The leathery skin began to burn, smoke rising from the point of impact. Fire did hurt it. Fire could damage it. Thomas and Connor rushed forward, grabbing Jaden and dragging him back toward us. The Wendigo recovered quickly, its empty eyes fixing on us with what I can only describe as rage. "You dare," it hissed. "You dare to strike me. I am ancient. I was old when your grandmothers' grandmothers were young. I am hunger itself. I am winter's heart. I am eternal." "You're a spirit," I said, surprised by the steadiness in my voice, "and spirits can be banished." I pulled out Ruth's sage bundle and held it up like a weapon. The Wendigo flinched back from the smoke. "You don't belong in this time," I continued, remembering Nathaniel's lectures about the nature of such entities. "The world has moved on. There's less room for things like you now, less belief, less fear." "There is always fear," the Wendigo replied. "There is always hunger." "But not enough to sustain you," Thomas added, catching on to what I was doing. "That's why you're desperate, why you're getting more aggressive, you're fading.
The Wendigo let out a howl that shook the trees, sending ice falling like hail. But there was something different in its voice now. Not just hunger and rage, but desperation, maybe even fear. "Return to the deep woods," Connor said, his voice firm despite his obvious terror. "Back to the old places where winter still holds sway. Leave the marked trails alone. Leave our people alone." For a long moment the Wendigo stood there, seeming to grow even taller, its shadow stretching across the frozen ground. Then, slowly, it began to shrink. Not physically, but as if its presence was diminishing, becoming less substantial. The temperature began to rise, the ice on the trees starting to melt. "This is not finished," the Wendigo said, its voice now little more than a whisper. "When winter comes in truth, when the snows grow deep, I will hunt again. I always hunt again." Then it was gone, fading into the shadows like smoke, leaving only the lingering cold and the smell of ancient decay. We got Jaden to his feet and made our way back to the camp, moving as quickly as we could. The forest seemed lighter, somehow less oppressive. When we reached the others, Ruth took one look at us and nodded. "You faced it, and you survived. The Wendigo has withdrawn, at least for now." We packed up quickly and headed back to our vehicles. Nobody spoke much during the hike out. We were all processing what we'd seen, what we'd faced. As we drove back to civilization, I watched the forest pass by my window and thought about what Ruth had said. This is not finished. She was right. We'd earned a temporary reprieve, a recognition of sorts from the ancient things that hunted these woods. But they were still there, still waiting. And as long as humans continued to venture into their territory, there would be more encounters. That night at the station, we filed our reports. Official language, careful wording, nothing that would get us labeled as crazy. Aggressive wildlife behavior, unusual atmospheric phenomena. Recommend continued area closure for public safety. But in our private files, in the documents we kept locked away, we wrote the truth. About the cuckoo that guarded the sacred places, about the dogman that hunted for sport, about the Wendigo that hungered for more than flesh. Thomas retired 3 months later. Gabriel transferred to a park in California. Ezra stayed, but he rarely patrolled alone anymore. As for me, I'm still here, still watching the tree line, still listening for howls in the darkness. Some nights when the moon is full and the temperature drops, I hear them. The creatures that share this forest with us. The legends that walk on 2 legs and 4. The things that existed before we drew our maps and built our roads and pretended we understood the natural world. I know now that we understand very little. The forest keeps its secrets, and in the darkest places, in the oldest groves, things still hunt that predate our civilization, our science, our rational explanations.
Upper levels. Then the line went dead. What kind of specimens are we talking about? Silas stopped walking and turned to face me. In the fading afternoon light, his face looked gaunt, almost skeletal. Listen carefully, because I'm only going to say this once. Whatever they told you at Fort Detrick, whatever you think you know about this place, forget it. Dulces Base isn't just about alien technology or government experiments. Level 6 is different. They keep things down there that should never have been found, let alone brought to this facility. A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the cold. What kind of things? The kind that have their own mythology, the kind that indigenous people around here have been warning about for centuries. He turned and kept walking. The kind that eat people. We reached what looked like a natural cave entrance hidden behind a rockfall. Silas pulled away some carefully arranged branches to reveal a steel door set into the rock. He punched a code into a weathered keypad, and the door hissed open, releasing a breath of stale cold air that smelled of concrete and something else, something organic and wrong. "Emergency access tunnel," Silas explained, pulling out 2 flashlights and handing me one. "Built in the 70s during the initial excavation, connects to level 1 maintenance corridors. From there, we can access the main elevator shaft." The tunnel was barely wide enough for us to walk single file. Our flashlight beams danced across rough-hewn rock walls that glistened with moisture. The temperature dropped further as we descended, and I could hear water dripping somewhere in the darkness ahead. The tunnel seemed to go on forever, sloping gradually downward, taking us deeper into the mountain. After what felt like an hour, but was probably only 20 minutes, the tunnel widened into a concrete corridor lined with pipes and electrical conduits. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting everything in a sickly green glow. This was Dulcis Base proper, level 1. "Stay close," Silas whispered, his hand moving to the pistol at his hip, "and keep your weapon ready." I unslung my rifle and flicked off the safety. The corridor stretched ahead of us, empty and silent, except for the hum of ventilation systems and the occasional drip of water. Doorways branched off on either side, leading to dark offices and storage rooms. Papers were scattered across the floor, and one door hung open on broken hinges. "Where is everyone?" And I asked. "That's what we're here to find out." We moved carefully through level 1, checking rooms as we went. The signs of panic were everywhere. Overturned chairs, abandoned coffee cups still half full. Computer terminals left logged in with desperate messages typed across the screens. One read simply, "It's loose. Level 6, God help us." The main elevator was in the central hub, a large circular room that served as the nexus for all 7 levels. The elevator itself was a massive industrial platform designed to move equipment and personnel between levels. Silas punched the call button, and we waited in tense silence. The elevator arrived with a mechanical grinding sound that seemed far too loud in the empty base. The doors opened to reveal an empty platform smeared with something dark that looked like blood. Silas and I exchanged glances. "We can still turn back," he said quietly. I thought about the people down on level 6, about Dr. Reeves and whatever team was still alive down there. I thought about the oath I'd taken when I joined this program, about the secrets I'd agreed to protect, even at the cost of my own life. "No," I said, stepping onto the elevator. "We go down." Silas followed, and the doors closed behind us with a sound like a coffin ceiling. He pressed the button for level 6. The elevator lurched and began its descent into the depths of Dulcis Base, taking us toward whatever horror waited below. As we descended, Silas began to talk, his voice barely above a whisper. 3 months ago, they brought something up from a cavern system discovered during drilling operations beneath level 7. The geologists thought they'd found a natural cave system, maybe connected to the Lechua cave network. But it was something else, something older. The expedition team found evidence of habitation down there, ancient markings on the walls, and he paused, swallowing hard. Bones, lots of bones. Human bones, some human, some not.
And they found something else, something alive. The elevator continued its inexorable descent. Level 2, level 3. The numbers lit up on the panel like a countdown to hell. They called it Subject 13. Silas continued, kept it in a specialized containment cell on level 6, along with the other biological specimens. Dr. Reeves was convinced it was some kind of undiscovered species, maybe a remnant population that had survived underground for thousands of years, but I saw it once through the observation window. It wasn't any species. It was something that should be dead, but wouldn't die. Something that had been human once, maybe, but had become something else, something hungry. Level 4. Level 5. The indigenous people around here have stories about it, Silas said. They call it by different names. The Wendigo, the evil that devours. A person who commits cannibalism in a time of famine becomes cursed, transformed into an insatiable creature of hunger. The more it eats, the more it grows. It can never be satisfied. And now we've given it an all-you-can-eat buffet, 7 levels deep. Level 6, the elevator slowed and stopped. The doors didn't open immediately. And in that moment of silence, I heard something that made my blood freeze. It was a sound like nothing I'd ever heard before, a keening, inhuman wail that echoed up through the ventilation system, filled with such desperate hunger and madness that it barely sounded real. Then the doors opened, and we stepped into level 6 of Dulces Base, where the real nightmare was just beginning. The first thing that struck me about level 6 was the cold. It was at least 20 degrees colder than the upper levels, cold enough that I could see my breath misting in the air, despite the base's climate control systems. The second thing was the smell, a mixture of industrial disinfectant, decay, and something wild and feral that reminded me of a slaughterhouse. The corridor ahead was dark. The emergency lighting cast everything in a dim red glow that made the blood on the walls look black. And there was blood splattered across the white tiles in arterial spray patterns, smeared along the walls where something had dragged itself or been dragged. Empty shell casings littered the floor, glinting in the emergency lights. Security put up a fight, Silas whispered, kneeling to examine the casings. 9mm, standard issue, lots of them. Did it work? I asked, though I suspected I knew the answer. Silas pointed to the wall where the blood trail ended. There were deep gouges in the concrete, 4 parallel scratches that looked like they'd been made by claws. What do you think? We moved carefully forward, our weapons raised, checking corners and doorways. The layout of level 6 was different from the upper levels. Instead of offices and storage rooms, this level was designed for containment and research. Heavy doors with reinforced frames lined the corridor, each marked with a specimen number and classification level. Most of the doors were closed, their security panels showing red, locked indicators, but some were open, and one had been torn completely off its hinges. "Where is everyone?" And I asked. "That's what we're here to find out." We moved carefully through level 1, checking rooms as we went. The signs of panic were everywhere. Overturned chairs, abandoned coffee cups still half full, computer terminals left logged in with desperate messages typed across the screens. One read simply, "It's loose." Level 6, God help us. The main elevator was in the central hub, a large circular room that served as the nexus for all 7 levels. The elevator itself was a massive industrial platform designed to move equipment and personnel between levels. Silas punched the call button, and we waited in tense silence. The elevator arrived with a mechanical grinding sound that seemed far too loud in the empty base. The doors opened to reveal an empty platform smeared with something dark that looked like blood.
Silas and I exchanged glances. "We can still turn back," he said quietly. I thought about the people down on level 6, about Dr. Reeves and whatever team was still alive down there. I thought about the oath I'd taken when I joined this program, about the secrets I'd agreed to protect.
People stumbled into the stairwell. 2 men in security uniforms and a woman in a lab coat, her face and clothes splattered with blood. "Close the door," one of the guards shouted. "Close it now." Silas slammed the door shut and helped me drag a heavy equipment locker across it as a barricade. Through the door, we could hear that thing approaching, its claws scraping against the floor. "Dr. Chen," Silas said, recognizing the woman. "What happened?" Dr. Chen was shaking, her eyes wide with shock. "It got into level 5 through the ventilation system. We tried to lock ourselves in the clean room, but it tore through the wall. It took Marcus first, then Sarah." Then she broke down, sobbing. The door shook as something massive slammed into it from the other side. The metal buckled, but held. "We need to keep moving," one of the guards said. His nameplate read Morrison. "Get to level 1, seal the emergency blast doors, and radio for extraction." "It won't matter," the other guard, younger, barely out of his 20s, said. His name tag read Chen, probably related to Dr. Chen. "That thing is impossible to kill. We emptied entire magazines into it. It just kept coming." "Dr. Reeves' notes mentioned weaknesses," I said. "Sound frequencies, fire, destroying the heart. We need to get to level 1 and set a trap." Another impact shook the door. This time claws punched through the metal, raking down with enough force to peel it like a can opener. "Move," Silas shouted, and we ran. We climbed the stairs 2 at a time, hearing the door behind us tear apart. The Wendigo's wail echoed up the stairwell, that same impossible sound of hunger and madness. It was coming. Level 3. Level 2. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but fear kept me moving. Behind us, I could hear it in the stairwell, could hear its claws on the concrete, could hear that wet, rattling breath. We burst through the door into level 1, and immediately started sealing it. Morrison and Chen grabbed another equipment locker, while Silas worked the emergency lock controls. Dr. Chen stood to the side, still in shock. "The arsenal," Silas said, pointing down the corridor. "Level 1 has an armory, incendiary grenades, plastic explosives. If we can't kill it with bullets, maybe we can trap it and burn it." "The server room," I added, remembering the layout from the briefing. "It has the sound system controls for the entire base. We could use the infrasonic frequencies Dr. Reeves mentioned, disoriented long enough to set charges." Behind us, the Wendigo hit the door with such force that the frame cracked. We had minutes at best. "Morris and Chen, get to the armory," Silas ordered. "Grab everything incendiary and meet us at the server room. Dr. Chen, can you access the sound systems?" She nodded, seeming to snap out of her shock. Yes, I have admin access." "Then let's move. We end this thing now, or we die trying." The door buckled again, and through the gap I saw one pale, glowing eye staring at us with infinite hunger. We ran. The server room was located in the heart of level 1, protected by multiple security doors that we sealed behind us as we went. Dr. Chen worked frantically at the control terminal, while Silas and I dragged equipment to barricade the entrance. The sounds of pursuit followed us through the corridors, the scraping of claws, the breaking of doors, and that endless, hungry wailing that seemed to vibrate in my bones. "How long to set up the frequency?" Silas asked, checking his pistol, and then methodically reloading with what looked like custom ammunition. 2 minutes, maybe 3, Dr. Chen said, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "The infrasonic generators were installed for crowd control purposes, but they've never been used. I need to calibrate them to the right frequency. 7 to 19 hertz should cause disorientation and nausea. At higher amplitudes, it might cause actual physical damage." "Make it hurt," I said, thinking of the bodies we'd seen, the trails of blood, the screams cut short. "Make it hurt bad." Morris and Chen burst through the door, their arms loaded with munitions. "We got the good stuff," Morrison said, dumping the gear on the floor. Thermite grenades, white phosphorus plastic explosives with remote detonators, and these, he held up what looked like a flare gun, magnesium rounds hot enough to melt steel. "Here's the plan," Silas said, spreading out a blueprint of level 1 on a nearby desk. "We lure it into the main conference room here. It's the largest open space on this level. Reinforced walls, only one entrance. Dr. Chen hits it with the infrasonic frequency to slow it down. We hit it with everything we have: thermite, white phosphorus, magnesium rounds. While it's burning, I'll place the plastic explosives on its chest, targeting the heart. We blow the charges, then we burn what's left until there's nothing but ash." "And if that doesn't work," Jen asked, his voice shaking, "then we seal level 1 and hope the military can finish what we started." A tremendous crash echoed through the base, followed by the sound of grinding metal. The Wendigo had broken through the last security door between us. "We're out of time," Dr. Chen said. "The system's ready. I can trigger it from this remote." She held up a small device, like a car key fob. "But you need to get that thing into the conference room first." "That's the easy part," I said, picking up 2 thermite grenades and checking my rifle. "It wants to eat us. We just need to be the bait." Silas nodded grimly. "Morris and Chen, you two set up the charges in the conference room. Place them in a circle, overlapping kill zones. Dr. Chen stays here to trigger the frequency. We'll lure it in, then get clear. Everyone understand?" We all nodded, though I could see the fear in everyone's eyes. This was a suicide mission, and we all knew it. "Good hunting," Morrison said. Then he and Chen grabbed the explosives and ran toward the conference room. Silas and I moved to the corridor outside the server room. The sounds were closer now, just around the corner, getting closer with every second. I could smell it, that wild, feral stench of old meat and hunger. "You ever see a Wendigo before today?" I asked Silas, trying to keep my voice steady. "Once. Colorado, 2019, a cave system near Mount Shasta. We lost 16 people before we managed to collapse the cave and seal it in. I thought that was the last one." He checked his custom ammunition again. "These are silver-tipped hollow points filled with white phosphorus. They won't kill it, but they'll hurt like hell." "Why silver?" "Old legends say it works on monsters. Figured it was worth a shot." A shadow fell across the far end of the corridor. Then the Wendigo stepped into view. In the full lighting of level 1, it was even more horrible than I had imagined. It stood at least 9 feet tall when it rose up on its hind legs, its emaciated frame covered in that gray, leathery skin. Its ribs moved with each breath, visible through the stretched skin, and its spine protruded in sharp ridges. The head was elongated, skull-like, with those glowing, pale eyes set deep in the sockets. The mouth opened, revealing rows of needle-sharp teeth, and a tongue that was too long, too dark, lolling out as it tasted the air. But the worst part was that I could see the human it had once been in the shape of the skull, the structure of the hands, even though they'd elongated into claws. This had been a person once, someone who had made a terrible choice in a moment of desperation, and had been cursed to become this thing of endless hunger. It saw us and went completely still, like a predator that had spotted prey. Then it opened its mouth and let out that wail again, and I understood why Dr. Reeves had been so interested in sound frequencies. The sound was like a physical force, pressing against my chest, making my ears ring and my vision blur. "Run!" Silas shouted, and we ran. We sprinted down the corridor toward the conference room, the Wendigo loping after us with terrifying speed. It moved on all fours now, its body low to the ground, claws striking sparks from the tile floor. I risked a glance back and saw it was gaining on us, closing the distance with impossible speed. Silas fired behind us without looking, his silver phosphorus rounds hitting the creature in the shoulder. It shrieked, a sound that was almost triumphant, and kept coming. We burst through the conference room doors. Morris and Chen were just finishing setting the charges, white bricks of plastic explosive arranged in a wide circle around the center of the room. Red lights blinked on the detonators, connected to remote triggers that Morrison wore on his belt. "Is it done?" I shouted. "Done enough," Morrison yelled back. "Everyone get to the corners." The Wendigo appeared in the doorway. its body too large, having to turn sideways to fit through. It paused there, its glowing eyes taking in the room. The four of us pressed into the corners, the obvious trap we'd laid. For a moment I thought it was too smart, that it would turn and leave, and we'd have to come up with another plan. But then its eyes fixed on Dr. Chen, and I saw something in its face that was almost like recognition. Its mouth opened and it spoke. "Chen," it rasped, its voice like grinding stones. "I remember Chen." Dr. Chen's face went white. "Oh God, Dr. Reeves, is that you?" The creature that had been Dr. Reeves took a step into the room. "Hungry," it said, "so hungry. Sarah, I couldn't stop." "Now!" Silas shouted. Dr. Chen hit the button on her remote. The lights in the room flickered, and then a sound filled the air. Not a sound I could hear exactly, but a frequency I could feel in my bones, in my teeth, in the jelly of my eyes. The infrasonic generators kicked into full power, and the Wendigo shrieked. It stumbled forward, its claws clutching at its head. The sound was causing it real pain.
Base. They were a different breed than us. Hazmat suits, biological containment equipment, orders to sterilize the entire facility. I gave my report to a grim-faced colonel who listened without expression, occasionally making notes on a tablet. Morrison Chen and Dr. Chen had survived the night with me on level 1, barricaded in the server room, waiting for dawn. We didn't talk much. What was there to say? We'd lost 17 people in the Dulce base outbreak. 17 people who had been doing their jobs, following orders, trying to understand something that should never have been brought to the surface. As the hazmat teams began their sweep of the lower levels, I walked through level 1 the last time. The conference room was sealed now, marked as a biohazard zone. Through the reinforced window, I could see the crater where Silas had made his last stand. They'd already bagged his remains, what little was left for burial. He'd be given a hero's funeral, though his name would never appear in any official record. That's how it worked in our world. We died in silence, protecting secrets most people didn't even know existed. "Sir," Morrison approached, looking exhausted. "They're asking us to submit to quarantine. 2 weeks, full medical screening, standard protocol for cryptid exposure." "Of course," I said. "Morrison, I wanted to thank you. You kept your head down there. You and Chen both. Silas would be proud." Morrison's jaw tightened. He shouldn't have had to do what he did, if the remote triggers had worked. "But they didn't," I interrupted gently. "And Silas knew that someone had to get close enough to make sure he made a choice, the right choice. That's all any of us can do." Dr. Chen was sitting in one of the offices, staring at nothing. When I entered, she looked up with eyes that had aged years in a single night. "I keep thinking about him," she said. "Dr. Reeves. He was my mentor, my friend. He was a good man, brilliant, dedicated, and he became that." "How did it happen?" I asked, sitting down across from her. "The files didn't say." She took a shaky breath. 3 days ago, there was an accident during a containment transfer. Subject 13 was being moved to a new cell with upgraded restraints. The creature was sedated, or so we thought. It woke up during the transfer and attacked. Dr. Reeves tried to help one of the guards who'd been wounded. The Wendigo. It bit him. Just a scratch, really, we thought. But then she closed her eyes. The transformation took 36 hours. We kept him isolated, tried to help him, but the hunger grew too strong. He broke out of the medical bay 2 nights ago. By the time security responded, he'd already killed 3 people. And the more he ate, the faster he changed. By yesterday morning, there was nothing left of the man he'd been. "The curse," I said, remembering the legends. "Once you taste human flesh, there's no going back." "We found something in his cell after it was over," Dr. Chen continued. She pulled a folded piece of paper from her pocket. "He must have written it before he lost the ability to form words. They found it stuck to the wall." She handed me the paper.
In shaky handwriting, it read, "Kill me before I kill them. I can feel it changing me. The hunger is all I can think about. If you're reading this, I've already lost. Don't let me hurt anyone else. Burn the body. Burn everything. Tell Sarah I'm sorry. Tell them all I'm sorry." I folded the paper carefully and handed it back. He was still fighting it at the end, still trying to protect people. "A lot of good it did," she said bitterly. "It matters," I insisted. He tried. Silas tried. You all tried. Sometimes that's all we can do in this job. Try to hold back the darkness, knowing we might fail, doing it anyway. The colonel appeared in the doorway. "Time to go. The base is being sealed permanently. Level 6 and 7 are going to be filled with concrete. The whole thing will be classified under National Security Memorandum 51. None of this ever happened." "What about the cave system where they found it?" I asked. "The cave where the Wendigo was living collapsed. Controlled explosives. If there are more down there, they'll stay buried. That's assuming they're even still alive after being sealed underground without food for 3 months. The Wendigo can survive a long time without food," Dr. Chen said softly. "That was one of Dr. Reeves' findings. It goes into a kind of hibernation, waiting, sometimes for decades, sometimes for centuries." The colonel's expression didn't change. "Then it will hibernate forever in the dark where it belongs. Now, let's move out." We walked through the base one last time, past the sealed doors, the blood-stained corridors, the empty rooms where people had worked and lived and died. The hazmat teams were everywhere now, taking samples, documenting everything, preparing to bury the secrets of Dulce Base forever. At the surface entrance, snow was still falling, covering the New Mexico landscape in white. It looked peaceful, beautiful even. Hard to believe that beneath our feet was a tomb holding horrors that most people couldn't imagine. The helicopter was waiting, already rotors spinning. Morrison and Chen climbed in first, then Dr. Chen. I paused at the door, looking back at the innocuous maintenance building that hid the entrance to Dulce Base. "Sir," the pilot called, "we need to go. Weather's closing in." I took one last look, thinking about Silas, about Dr. Reeves, about all the secrets buried in the New Mexico earth. Then I climbed aboard, and the helicopter lifted off, banking away from our Chileta Mesa. As we flew over the forest, I saw them below, members of the Jicarilla Apache tribe, standing in a clearing, watching the helicopter. They knew. Of course they knew. Their ancestors had known for centuries what lived in the deep places, what happened to those who disturbed the old things that slept in the dark. One of them raised a hand in what might have been a blessing or a warning. Then the snow obscured them, and they were gone. The helicopter headed east, toward Fort Detrick, toward debriefing and quarantine, and the slow process of trying to forget what we'd seen. But I knew I'd never forget. None of us would. We'd faced the Wendigo and survived, but the victory felt hollow because I knew the truth that the government would never acknowledge, that the Wendigo wasn't unique. It wasn't some isolated anomaly. It was a warning of what lurks in the forgotten places of America, waiting in the dark, hungry, patient, and there were so many dark places left. The quarantine facility at Fort Detrick was exactly what you'd expect. Sterile white rooms, medical examinations every 6 hours, and isolation that gave you too much time to think. Morrison, Chen, and Dr. Chen were in separate wings. I didn't see them for the entire 2 weeks of observation. The doctors were looking for any sign of infection, any hint that we might have been exposed to whatever biological agent that had transformed Dr. Reeves. On day 4, they showed me footage from the Dulce Base security cameras, recovered from the secure servers before the facility was sealed. I watched as Dr. Reeves transform, his screams of horror and pain echoing through the medical bay. I watched him break free,
watched him hunt through the corridors, watched the moment his eyes fell on his first victim. The truly horrifying part was how human he still looked in those early hours. You could see him fighting it, trying to hold on to his humanity, even as the curse reshaped him from the inside out. But the hunger always won. It always won. "Why are you showing me this?" I asked the debriefer, a man who introduced himself only as Agent Walsh. "Because you need to understand what we're dealing with," he said, freezing the footage on an image of the Wendigo's face. "This isn't a disease. It's not a virus or bacteria that we can cure with medicine. It's something else. Something that exists at the intersection of biology and mythology. Something that's been hunting in North America for thousands of years. The indigenous people know. They've always known." "Yes," Walsh agreed, "and we've been arrogant enough to ignore them. To think that we could capture these things, study them, understand them." Dulce Base was the 5th facility breach in the last decade. The others were successfully contained before things got out of hand. This time, he gestured at the screen, this time, we lost an entire facility. 5th? I sat forward. There are more of these facilities? More captured entities? Walsh's expression was grave. There are 16 active containment facilities across the United States, codenamed Noah's Ark. Each one houses entities that officially don't exist, cryptids, as the files call them, things that should be extinct or never existed at all, things that hunt in the dark places. He pulled up a map on his tablet, showing locations scattered across the country. Area 51 has something we pulled out of the Nevada desert. Montauk has entities from the ocean depths. Denver Airport's underground levels, yes, the conspiracy theories are partially true, house things that...
Predatory instinct. How long does it take for the person to completely disappear? Based on Dr. Reeves, about 72 hours from first consumption. But the hunger starts much earlier. That's the insidious part. The curse makes you crave it, makes you want to feed. Fighting it is torture, and eventually everyone breaks. I thought about that for a moment. The indigenous peoples have stories about warriors who fought the hunger until they died, who let themselves starve rather than transform. Maybe, Dr. Chan said, but those are just stories. Everyone I've seen infected has transformed. Everyone. The curse is too strong, the hunger too overwhelming. There has to be a way to fight it. Why? She asked, her eyes intense. So we can capture more of them, study them, learn how to create our own Wendigos? Because that's where this is heading. That's what these facilities are really about, not containment, but weaponization. I wanted to argue, but I couldn't. She was right. In the files Walsh had shown me, there were proposals for controlled deployment of various entities, strategic advantages in asymmetric warfare, the kinds of things that should never be put into official documents, let alone considered seriously. We talked for another hour, but it was mostly saying goodbye. Neither of us was likely to see the other again. We'd survived Dulce Base, but we'd lost something in those corridors, something we'd never get back. On day 14, I was cleared from quarantine. Morrison and Chen were cleared too. We met briefly in the administration building, trading contact information that we all knew we'd never use. In our world, you didn't keep in touch. You tried to forget. Agent Walsh gave me my new assignment, Mount Shasta, California. There's a facility built into the mountain, monitoring seismic activity and other things. We've had reports of unusual sounds in the deep caverns, signs of habitation. Your job is containment assessment and security protocol review. What's down there? I asked. We don't know yet. That's why you're going. I should have refused. Should have walked away, taken a medical discharge, gone back to a normal life where the worst things in the world were human. But I didn't, because someone had to do this work.
Someone had to stand between the darkness and the light, even knowing that eventually the darkness might win. 3 days later, I was on a transport helicopter flying over the California forests, heading toward Mount Shasta. Below, the trees stretched endlessly, hiding their secrets. Somewhere down there were things that should be dead, but weren't. Things that remembered when humans were prey. Things that waited in the dark places with infinite patience. I thought about Silas one last time, about his warnings, his fear, his sacrifice, about how he'd known exactly what was waiting in Dulce Base, but had gone in anyway because it was his job, his duty. As the mountain loomed ahead, I made myself a promise. I would do this work. I would stand watch against the horrors that lurked in America's hidden places, but I would never forget what these things cost. Never forget the people who died in the dark, fighting monsters that officially didn't exist. And if the time came when I had to make Silas's choice to sacrifice myself to keep the horror contained, I would do it without hesitation. Because that was the job. That was the mission. And somewhere in the darkness, the creatures waited, patient and hungry, for the next time humans grew too curious, too arrogant, and opened doors that should remain forever closed.
Nothing. My thoughts kept circling back to the missing hours, generating scenarios that grew increasingly disturbing. Had I wandered off the trail, encountered wildlife, met other hikers with harmful intentions? Around noon, I decided to check my camera roll again, scrolling through photos from the past few weeks. There was nothing unusual until I reached yesterday's date. After the trailhead photo, there were 5 more images I had no memory of taking. The first showed a section of the trail where it narrowed between 2 large boulders. The second captured a clearing with unusually tall grass. The third was blurry, showing what might have been a deer or other animal in the distance. The fourth showed my own shadow stretched across the ground, elongated strangely. The fifth and final photo made my stomach clench. It showed nothing but dense trees, but they were exactly like those described on the online forum post I'd read. Unnaturally thin, their trunks twisted in spirals, their bark patchy and diseased-looking. The image was slightly tilted, as if taken hastily. I stared at this last photo for a long time, trying to reconcile it with my fragmented memories. I had no recollection of seeing these trees, much less photographing them. Yet, here was evidence that I had. That afternoon, I called in sick for Monday, knowing I wouldn't be able to focus on work. My head felt heavy, stuffed with cotton, my thoughts sluggish yet racing simultaneously. I found myself staring at my hiking boots for long periods, as if they might suddenly speak and tell me where they had walked. The scratches on my hands began to itch intensely around sunset. When I examined them again, they seemed to form a pattern. Not random scratches from branches, but almost like marks deliberately placed. The thought sent a surge of adrenaline through me. Was I imagining things now? Seeing patterns where none existed? That night, I dreamed of walking through the forest again. But in the dream, the trees were watching me, their bark splitting open to reveal eyes that tracked my movement. I woke at 2:17 a.m., drenched in sweat, certain I had heard something moving in my apartment. I lay frozen, listening intently, but the only sound was the hum of the refrigerator and my own ragged breathing. I turned on every light and searched each room, looking behind furniture, in closets, under the bed. There was nothing, of course, nothing but the growing certainty that something had followed me home from that forest. Monday morning found me sitting in my doctor's waiting room, leg bouncing nervously as I checked my watch repeatedly. I had called as soon as the office opened, describing my symptoms as sudden memory loss and disorientation. The receptionist had hesitated before scheduling me for the earliest available appointment. Dr. Westfield had been my physician for nearly a decade. His office was a familiar space of muted colors and outdated magazines, usually a source of reassurance. Today, it felt confining, almost threatening. "So, tell me what's going on," he said, after the nurse had taken my vitals and left us alone in the examination room. I explained about the hike, the missing hours, waking up driving home with no memory of how I got there. I showed him the scratches on my hands and the larger scrape on my forearm. I mentioned the headache that had been building since yesterday, the difficulty concentrating, the strange dreams. He listened attentively, his expression neutral. When I finished, he began a series of tests, checking my pupils, testing my reflexes, asking me to follow his finger with my eyes, to touch my nose, then his finger, then my nose again. "Any history of seizures?" he asked. "Fainting spells? Episodes like this before?" I shook my head to each question. "Any drug use? Alcohol, before or during the hike?" "No, nothing like that." He frowned slightly. "And you're certain about the timeline? You checked in at the trailhead around 9:30 a.m., And your next clear memory is driving home around 6 p.m. Yes, I confirmed. Almost 6 hours just gone. He made notes in my chart, his pen scratching across the paper. Physically, you seem fine. No signs of concussion or neurological issues that I can detect. Your blood pressure is elevated, but given the circumstances, that's not surprising. So what happened to me? I asked, hearing the edge of desperation in my voice. Dr. Westfield leaned back in his chair. There are several possibilities. Transient global amnesia is one. It's a temporary disruption of memory formation, usually lasting several hours. It's rare, especially in someone your age, but not unheard of. Stress can be a trigger. But I wasn't particularly stressed during the hike, I protested. The opposite, actually. I went to relax. The brain is complex, he said simply. Another possibility is what we call a dissociative episode, a psychological response, where a person disconnects from their thoughts, surroundings, even their identity. Often it's triggered by trauma or extreme stress, but sometimes it can happen with no obvious cause. I thought about this. So I was what? Walking around in some kind of trance for 6 hours? Possibly functioning quite normally, he corrected. People in dissociative states can drive cars, have conversations, perform routine tasks. They just don't form memories of it. The thought was profoundly disturbing, that I might have been moving through the world, interacting with it, while some essential part of me was absent. I'd like to run some basic blood work, Dr. Westfield continued, to rule out any physical causes, and I'm going to refer you to a neurologist for further testing, including an MRI. I nodded, grateful for concrete action, though doubt nodded at me. Would an MRI show 6 missing hours? Would blood work reveal what happened in that forest? As I was preparing to leave, Dr. Westfield paused with his hand on the door. One more thing. I'd advise against returning to that trail, at least until we have more information. Whatever triggered this episode might still be present there. His warning was unnecessary. The thought of returning to Black Pine Loop filled me with visceral dread. Yet, even as I assured him I would stay away, a part of me knew that the forest held the only real answers to my questions. That evening, I received a call from the neurologist's office. The earliest appointment was 3 weeks away. 3 weeks of not knowing, of questioning my own mind. The prospect was intolerable. I turned instead to the internet, searching more thoroughly for information about Black Pine Loop. Most results were, as I remembered, brief mentions on hiking forums, a few outdated trail maps. But then I found something new. A local news article from 2019 about a search and rescue operation in the area. A hiker had gone missing for 2 days before being found wandering along a road several miles from where he'd parked. The article was frustratingly vague about the circumstances, mentioning only that the man was disoriented and dehydrated when found. There was no follow-up article, no indication of what happened to him during those missing days. I searched for more information about this incident, but found nothing. It was as if the story had appeared briefly and then been deliberately forgotten, just like my missing hours. By Wednesday, the scratches on my hands had mostly healed, but the larger scrape on my forearm had developed an unusual redness around its edges. It didn't appear infected. There was no warmth, no swelling, but the skin surrounding it had taken on a slightly mottled appearance, like a subtle bruise that wouldn't fade. Sleep had become increasingly difficult. I would lie awake until exhaustion finally overcame anxiety, only to wake frequently throughout the night. My dreams, when they came, were fragmented, but always set in the same forest. In these dreams, I was searching for something among the trees, though I never knew what. The sense of urgency was overwhelming, matched only by the dread of actually finding whatever it was I sought. That morning, as I showered, a flash of memory struck me with such sudden clarity that I gasped aloud. I was back on the trail, but it wasn't the section I remembered from the beginning of my hike. In this memory, the path narrowed significantly, barely visible among thick underbrush. The air felt dense, almost gelatinous, difficult to breathe, and there was a sound, a low, constant hum that seemed to emanate from the ground itself. The memory lasted only seconds before dissolving, leaving me standing in the shower, water running cold, my heart racing. Was it real? An actual fragment of my missing time? Or was my mind manufacturing false memories to fill the void? I called in sick to work again, unable to face the prospect of normal conversation,
of pretending everything was fine. Instead, I spent the day researching memory lost, dissociative episodes, even the geological and environmental history of the area where Black Pine Loop was located. I learned that the region had been heavily logged in the early 1900s, then partially replanted in the 1950s. There were no significant environmental hazards noted, no abandoned mines that might leak gas, no toxic waste sites. The area was unremarkable geologically, with no unusual formations or cave systems that might explain my experience. By afternoon, my search had taken a darker turn. I found myself reading about cognitive effects of various toxins, parasites that could affect human behavior, even obscure psychological conditions that might explain my symptoms. None seemed to fit exactly. As evening approached, I received an unexpected call from an unknown number. When I answered, there was a long pause before a man's voice spoke. "Is this the person who posted about Black Pine Loop?" I hadn't posted anything online about my experience. "No," I replied cautiously, "but I did hike there recently." Another pause. "Did you?" My grip tightened on the phone. "Who is this?" "That doesn't matter," the voice said. "What matters is that you stay away from there. Don't go back." "Why?" I demanded. "What's out there?" "Nothing good," he replied. "Nothing you want to remember." Before I could ask anything else, the call ended. I tried calling back immediately, but the number was already disconnected. The call left me shaken, pacing my apartment, checking the locks repeatedly. Who was this person? How had they found me? And what did they know about Black Pine Loop that I didn't? That night, I dreamed of the twisted trees again. In the dream, I was standing among them, my hand reaching out to touch one of the spiraled trunks. As my fingers made contact with the bark, it yielded like flesh, warm and pulsing. I jerked awake, the sensation so vivid I could still feel the texture against my fingertips. I stumbled to the bathroom, splashing cold water on my face. In the mirror, my reflection looked haggard, eyes sunken with exhaustion. As I lowered my hands from my face, something caught my attention, a small, dark mark on my right wrist that I hadn't noticed before. Under the harsh bathroom light, I examined it closely. It wasn't a bruise or scratch, but what appeared to be a small pattern pressed into my skin like an ink stamp nearly faded away. The design was geometric, a circle containing what might have been a stylized tree or branch. I scrubbed at it with soap and water, but the mark remained. It wasn't ink. It seemed to be under the skin, like a tattoo beginning to heal. A tattoo I had no memory of getting. The room seemed to tilt around me as implications cascaded through my mind. If someone had marked my skin, what else might have been done to me during those missing hours? What else might I be carrying inside me, unknown, unseen? A week passed. The mark on my wrist neither faded nor became more pronounced. The neurologist's appointment remained weeks away. My work suffered as concentration became increasingly difficult. Colleagues noticed my distraction, my jumpiness, the dark circles under my eyes. I deflected their concerns with vague references to insomnia, to stress. The mysterious phone call was not repeated, but its warning echoed constantly in my thoughts. Stay away from there. Don't go back. I tried to follow this advice. I truly did. But as days passed, with no answers, only more questions, the certainty grew that Black Pine Loop held the key to understanding what had happened to me. The decision to return was not made in a single moment, but accumulated gradually, like sediment building into stone. By Friday evening, it was no longer a question of if, but when. I prepared more carefully this time. I charged my phone fully and brought a portable battery. I packed extra water, food, a first aid kit, a flashlight. I told a colleague I was going hiking and would check in with him by 5 p.m., a safety measure I should have taken the first time. Most importantly, I brought a small digital voice recorder. If my memory failed again, perhaps technology would succeed where my mind could not. Saturday morning dawned clear and cool. The drive to the trailhead seemed shorter this time, more direct, as if the road itself was eager for my return. The gravel parking area was empty when I arrived, just as it had been before. The same weathered sign marked the trail entrance, Black Pine Loop Trail. Standing at the trailhead, I activated the voice recorder. It's 9:17 a.m. I spoke clearly. I'm about to begin hiking Black Pine Loop for the second time. My purpose is to discover what happened during my previous visit. I paused, then added, if you're listening to this and I'm not around, something went wrong. The first section of trail was exactly as I remembered, winding through tall pines, occasionally opening into small clearings. I narrated my progress into the recorder, describing landmarks, noting the time frequently. 9:45 a.m., approximately 1 mile in. Nothing unusual so far. 10:12 a.m., past a distinctive fallen tree crossing the path, still following the main trail. As I hiked deeper into the forest, tension built within me. Each step brought me closer to the point where my memories had previously ended. Would it happen again? Would I suddenly wake up hours later with no recollection of what had transpired? Then I saw it. The peculiar rock formation I had noted just before my memories cut off last time. It resembled a crouching figure, though it was clearly just an unusual arrangement of natural stones. I stopped, heart pounding. 10:38 a.m. I spoke into the recorder. I've reached the last point I clearly remember from my previous hike. Beyond this is unknown territory. I stood for several minutes, observing, listening. The forest seemed ordinary enough. Birds called overhead. A slight breeze moved through the canopy. Nothing suggested danger or abnormality. Taking a deep breath, I continued forward. The trail narrowed as it descended into a slight depression. The air felt cooler here, shadows deeper as the trees grew closer together. I kept the recorder running, describing everything I saw. After another 15 minutes of hiking, the trail split. The main path continued straight, while a narrower, less distinct trail branched to the right. I hesitated, trying to intuit which way I might have gone during my first visit. The narrower path drew my attention. It seemed familiar somehow, though I couldn't place why. I decided to follow it, carefully marking the junction with an arrangement of sticks so I could find my way back. This secondary trail quickly became more overgrown, requiring me to push through undergrowth occasionally. The scratches on my hands from my previous visit suddenly made more sense. 11:07 a.m. I recorded, following a side trail that branches from the main loop. Vegetation is denser here, no clear footprints or signs of recent passage. The forest changed subtly as I continued. The predominant pines gave way to other species I couldn't identify. The trees grew closer together, their trunks thinner, their arrangement somehow more regular than would occur naturally. A faint humming sound became noticeable, not mechanical, but like the collective buzzing of distant insects. The air felt heavier, more resistant, just as I had fleetingly remembered in the shower days earlier. 11:23 a.m. There's a sound here, a vibration almost. The air quality is different.
The trees are unusual. I stopped abruptly as the trail opened into a small clearing. At its center stood a circle of those twisted trees I had seen in the 5th photograph on my phone. Unnaturally thin, their trunks spiraling upward, bark patchy and diseased-looking. There were 13 of them, arranged in a perfect circle about 20 feet in diameter. The humming was louder here, emanating seemingly from the ground itself. The air within the circle of trees appeared slightly distorted, like heat waves rising from hot pavement. 11:26 a.m. My voice shook slightly as I recorded. "I've found the trees from the photo. They're in a circle. Something about them seems wrong, unnatural." I approached cautiously, staying outside the circle. The trees were even stranger up close. Their bark was not like normal tree bark. It was smoother, with an almost manufactured quality. The pattern, too, regular. The spiraling of the trunks was identical for each tree, as if they had been deliberately twisted by some immense force. At the base of one tree, I noticed a small pile of stones, black, smooth, uniform in size, identical to the ones I had found in my pocket after the first hike. "These are the same stones," I recorded. "Someone placed them here deliberately." As I circled the formation, staying well back from the trees themselves, I noticed marks in the soil, indentations that might have been footprints, though they seemed too regular, too precise. Following them, I discovered a flat stone about the size of a dinner plate, partially hidden beneath the leaves.
There once, during our sophomore year of college, it wasn't an official campsite, just an unmarked clearing about 3 hours deep into the state forest. No designated trail led there, no rangers patrolled it. You had to climb over a steep natural ledge to reach it, hence our nickname for the place. We discovered it by accident during a hike 5 years earlier. The spot had everything: a flat clearing perfect for tents, a small stream nearby, and someone had already arranged rocks into a fire ring. Most importantly, it offered complete isolation. No cell service, no other hikers, nothing but wilderness stretching for miles. "What about it?" I asked, although I already knew where this conversation was heading. "We should go back," Cole interjected. "One last trip before winter hits." I hesitated. Something about that place had always felt wrong to me, even during our first visit when nothing unusual happened. But nostalgia is a powerful drug, and the thought of escaping my cubicle for a weekend tempted me beyond reason. "Just 3 days," Jason pressed. "Friday through Sunday, like the old days." Against my better judgment, I agreed. We settled on the 3rd weekend of September. I requested time off work, Jason arranged for coverage at his job, and Cole never needed permission from anyone. We coordinated supplies through a group text: sleeping bags, food, water purification tablets, first aid kit, headlamps, boots. I volunteered to bring the tent, a 4-person weatherproof model I'd purchased for a trip that never materialized. Jason would handle food, mostly dehydrated meals and energy bars. Cole promised firewood and alcohol. As the day approached, I found myself checking the weather obsessively. The forecast showed clear skies, but I packed extra tarps anyway. Something about returning to Whispering Ridge made me anxious in ways I couldn't articulate. I told myself it was just pre-trip jitters. The night before our departure, I dreamt of trees with eyes. Not eyes embedded in bark, but watching from between branches. I woke at 3:17 a.m., drenched in sweat, despite the autumn chill. My apartment felt too empty, too quiet. I lay awake until dawn, listening to the occasional car passing on the street below, wondering if I should cancel. I didn't. Some decisions we make knowing they're mistakes, yet we make them anyway. We met at a diner just outside the forest entrance, arriving in separate vehicles. Jason looked thinner than I remembered, his once athletic frame now wiry and tense. Cole hadn't changed much, still broad-shouldered and sporting that perpetual 5 o'clock shadow. We ate quickly, reviewing our route over coffee and maps. "The turnoff is unmarked," Jason explained, tracing a finger along a faded hiking trail. "We'll park at the main lot, then hike about 40 minutes to this creek. From there, we head east through this section of pines until we hit the ridge." Cole nodded, mouthful of pancakes. "And we're sure we can still find it?" "I've been back once," Jason admitted. "About 2 years ago. It's still there." I wanted to ask why he'd gone back alone, but something in his expression stopped me. We drove to the trailhead in convoy, my car following Jason's old Honda, Cole riding shotgun with him. The parking lot was nearly empty, just a ranger's truck and a couple with hiking poles, preparing for a day trip. We shouldered our packs, checked our supplies one last time, and headed into the forest. The main trail was well maintained for the first mile, but as we veered east onto the unmarked path, Jason remembered the terrain grew challenging. Fallen trees blocked our way multiple times. The forest floor was spongy with decades of decomposing leaves. Overhead branches formed a canopy so dense that by mid-afternoon it seemed like dusk was already settling. "It's colder than I expected," Cole said, zipping his jacket higher. He was right. Despite the forecast promising mid-60s, the temperature in the forest couldn't have been above 50. Our breath formed clouds in front of our faces. The air smelled sharp with pine and something else, something metallic, like the scent of pennies in your palm. "We should be close," Jason nodded, pausing to consult his compass. "The ridge should be just ahead." We pushed through a thick stand of pines, branches scraping our arms and faces. And suddenly, there it was. The ledge, a natural stone formation that rose about 15 feet, creating a wall we'd need to climb to reach our destination. "Just like I remembered," Cole grinned. But his smile didn't reach his eyes. We climbed single file, finding the same handholds and footholds we'd used years before. At the top, we helped each other over the final lip of rock, then stood for a moment, catching our breath and looking down at the clearing below. Whispering Ridge hadn't changed. The fire pit remained, stones blackened from countless flames. The clearing was perhaps 30 feet in diameter, surrounded by dense forest on all sides, except for the ledge we just climbed. The stream trickled nearby, barely audible over the constant hushing of wind through pines. "Home sweet home," Jason said, dropping his pack. We made camp efficiently, working with the practiced coordination of people who'd done this together before. The tent went up near the center of the clearing. We gathered additional stones to reinforce the firing. Cole arranged his pre-cut logs in a neat stack nearby. I unpacked the small camp stove and cooking gear. By the time darkness fell, we had a fire crackling, 3 camping chairs arranged around it, and our sleeping bags ready inside the tent. I heated water for our dehydrated meals, while Jason produced a bottle of whiskey from his pack. "Two old friends," he toasted, passing the bottle. The whiskey burned going down, but it pushed back against the unusual cold. We ate our reconstituted pasta, reminisced about college days, and avoided talking about our current lives. The fire cast long shadows that danced at the edges of the clearing. Occasionally, one of us would glance into the darkness beyond our campsite, then quickly return to the conversation. "Remember when we used to think we'd change the world?" Cole laughed, but there was something bitter in his voice. Jason nodded. "Still might." "There's time?" "Is there?" I asked, not sure why the question surfaced. The conversation lulled. The fire popped and hissed. Somewhere deep in the forest, a branch snapped. "Did you guys hear that?" Cole asked. We all pretended we hadn't. I woke before dawn, disoriented. The interior of the tent was pitch black and freezing cold. My watch read 5:22 a.m. Beside me, Jason slept facing away, his breathing deep and regular. Cole's sleeping bag was empty. Needing to relieve myself, I unzipped the tent as quietly as possible and stepped outside. The fire had died completely. Not even embers remained. A thick mist hung just above the ground, transforming the clearing into something from another time. The air smelled wrong. Not the expected forest sense of pine and earth, but something stagnant, like standing water in an abandoned basement. I found Cole sitting on a fallen log at the edge of the clearing, staring into the forest. "Couldn't sleep?" I asked, approaching slowly. He didn't turn. "Something's watching us." I followed his gaze, but saw nothing but trees and mist. "Probably just deer or something." "Not deer." His voice was flat. "I heard it moving around the tent all night, circling, breathing." A shiver ran across my shoulders that had nothing to do with the cold. "Want some coffee? I can get the stove going." Cole finally looked at me, and I was struck by how exhausted he appeared. Eyes sunken, skin ashen. "Did you notice the stream?" "What about it?" "It's running backward." I laughed nervously. "That's not possible." Cole stood up. "See for yourself." I followed him to the stream, more to humor him than anything else. The water looked darker than it should, almost black in the weak pre-dawn light. I crouched down, watching leaves and twigs drift by. Cole was wrong. The stream flowed in the normal direction, but as I watched, I noticed something odd about the water itself. It seemed to move too slowly, as if slightly more viscous than water should be. "It's just water," I said, standing up. Cole shook his head. "It changed when you came. It knows we're watching now." I was about to respond when Jason called from the tent. "What are you guys doing?" "Just getting some air," I called back, grateful for the interruption. "I'm going to start coffee." The day improved with sunlight and caffeine. Cole became more like himself, laughing at Jason's jokes and helping prepare breakfast. By mid-morning, the incident seemed forgotten. We decided to explore.
Cole. Something moved in the fog, a shadow, quick and low to the ground. I spun toward it, heart hammering against my ribs. Nothing there. My headlamp cut weak path through the mist as I circled the campsite, calling my friends' names with increasing desperation. No response came, except the distant rustling of leaves. Both their sleeping bags were empty, but their phones and wallets remained in the tent. Who leaves without shoes, phone, or wallet? At the edge of the clearing, I found the first clue. Jason's sweatshirt lying on the ground, one sleeve stretched as if pulled forcefully. 10 yards further into the forest, I found his t-shirt, then his watch. Each item formed a perfect breadcrumb trail leading deeper into the woods. I followed, aware that I was making a terrible mistake, but unable to abandon my friends. The fog seemed to part just enough to reveal the next item, then closed behind me as I passed. A quarter-mile in, the trail split. Jason's jeans lay to the left, while Cole's hoodie appeared on a path to the right. I stood paralyzed by indecision until I heard it. A whisper that might have been my name, coming from the left fork. I turned my headlamp in that direction and saw movement. A figure ducking behind a tree. "Jason?" I called, voice cracking. The figure stepped partially into view. The right height and build for Jason, but somehow wrong. Movements too fluid, posture too straight. Before I could process what I was seeing, my headlamp flickered and died. Total darkness enveloped me. Not the darkness of a night in the woods with ambient starlight, but absolute, impenetrable blackness. I fumbled in my pocket for my phone, finding it dead despite being fully charged when we'd gone to sleep. Something rustled in the underbrush nearby. Not one set of footsteps, but many, moving in perfect synchronization. They circled me slowly, maintaining distance but clearly aware of my position. I remained frozen, afraid that movement would trigger whatever was out there. A sound reached my ears, breathing heavy and wet, like someone with fluid in their lungs. It came from directly behind me. I felt warm air on the back of my neck. I ran blind, terrified, with no sense of direction. Branches whipped my face and arms. I tripped over roots and stones, falling repeatedly, only to scramble back up and continue fleeing. Behind me, something pursued, something heavy that crashed through underbrush without concern for stealth. After what felt like hours, but was probably minutes, I burst through the trees and found myself back at the ledge, our entry point to the campsite. Morning light had begun to filter through the canopy. I turned, expecting to see my pursuer, but the forest behind me was still and empty. I waited at the ledge until full daylight, calling for my friends until my voice gave out. Neither appeared. With trembling hands, I climbed down the rock face and hiked back to the parking lot, half expecting to find their vehicles gone. They weren't. Both cars sat exactly where we'd left them, locked and undisturbed. I drove to the nearest ranger station, incoherently reporting my missing friends. The rangers were professional but skeptical, especially when I couldn't precisely mark our campsite on their maps. They noted that no official campground existed in that area of the forest. "We'll send out a search team," the head ranger assured me. "But if your friends separated from you, they might have already hiked out to another exit point." I knew better, but couldn't explain why. The search found nothing. No tent, no campsite, no belongings, no sign that 3 people had spent 2 nights in the forest. No bones arranged in spirals, no crude shelter. Nothing. But endless trees and silence. 2 weeks after returning from Whispering Ridge, I received the first letter. No return address, postmarked from a small town in Pennsylvania I'd never heard of. Inside was a single Polaroid photograph, showing our campsite from an angle that suggested it had been taken from the surrounding trees. Jason, Cole, and I sat around the fire, our faces turned slightly away from the camera, as if we'd heard something in the forest. I didn't remember anyone taking pictures during our trip. None of us had brought a Polaroid camera. I studied the image for hours, noticing details that made my skin crawl. In the background, barely visible between 2 distant trees, stood a figure, too tall, too thin, its proportions subtly wrong. And our expressions in the photo weren't casual or relaxed. We looked terrified, frozen in the moment before flight. The second letter arrived a month later, this time from Oregon. Another Polaroid, the 3 of us asleep in the tent, photographed through the mesh window. The tent flap was open wider than we'd left it that night. Someone, something, had stood over us while we slept. I called the detective assigned to the missing persons case repeatedly, but interest had waned when no evidence surfaced. "People go missing in national forests all the time," he explained with rehearsed patience. "Usually, they've chosen to disappear." I knew Jason wouldn't abandon his elderly mother, who depended on his support. Cole wouldn't leave behind the construction job he'd finally secured after months of searching. But without evidence, the case stalled. The final letter arrived exactly 3 months after our trip, postmarked from my own city, which terrified me more than its contents. A third Polaroid, showing the crude shelter we'd discovered but transformed. The plywood walls now displayed hundreds of photographs pinned to the surface. Even in the grainy image, I recognized myself in many of them, entering my apartment building, sitting at my desk by the window, sleeping in my bed. I'd been watched for months, maybe longer. That night I heard it for the first time. The same wet, labored breathing I'd heard in the forest, now outside my bedroom window, on the 4th floor of my apartment building. When I gathered the courage to look outside, I saw nothing but empty streets and streetlights casting yellow pools on wet pavement. But something had left muddy footprints on the fire escape. Prints too large for human, with toes too long and articulated like fingers. I didn't sleep that night, or many nights after. I installed additional locks, security cameras, motion detector lights. None of it helped the growing certainty that whatever had taken my friends had followed me home. 5 months after our camping trip, Cole's sister called me. Her voice trembled with a mixture of hope and dread. "I got a text from Cole's phone," she said. "First one since he disappeared." My grip on my own phone tightened. What did it say? Just coordinates, GPS coordinates, and one word: help. I knew before she told me the coordinates would lead back to Whispering Ridge. When she confirmed this, something inside me shattered. The fragile normalcy I'd constructed since returning from the forest collapsed like a house of cards. "I'm going to send them to the police." "They won't find anything," I said, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. "I need those coordinates." "Why? You can't be thinking of going back there." I didn't answer her question directly. "Did you tell anyone else about the text?" "No, just you." A pause. "You know something. You're not telling me." "It's better if you don't know," I replied. "Send me the exact coordinates, then delete the message and forget you received it." She argued, of course, threatened to call the police herself if I didn't explain. Eventually, I told her a sanitized version of what had happened, that we'd become lost, separated in the forest, that I believe Jason and Cole might have found shelter somewhere remote with limited phone service. I promised to take experienced guides, emergency supplies, proper communication equipment. All lies. The coordinates arrived in my email an hour later, along with the message: "Find my brother." I spent the next week preparing, not with camping gear and hiking supplies, but with different tools altogether. A handheld GPS unit, a night vision monocular I purchased from a hunting supply store, a digital recorder, and my father's revolver, taken from the safe where it had remained since his death 3 years earlier. I'd never fired it, but I watched enough YouTube videos to understand the basics. I told no one where I was going. I called in sick to work, citing a family emergency. I left no note, made no arrangements for my absence. Part of me already knew I might not return. The forest looked different in winter. Skeletal trees, patches of snow and shaded areas, the undergrowth withered and brown. I reached the trailhead at noon, parked in the now empty lot, and began the hike with single-minded determination. The GPS unit led me unerringly toward the coordinates from Cole's text, which aligned almost perfectly with my memory of our campsite. The forest was silent, except for the crunch of dead leaves and occasional twigs beneath my boots. No birds called, no squirrels darted through branches. The absence of wildlife registered as wrong on a primal level, a warning sign my body recognized before my conscious mind. I reached the ledge by mid-afternoon. The climb was more difficult than I remembered, the hand and foothold slick with ice in places. At the top, I stood staring down,
bending in directions human anatomy wouldn't allow. "You're not Cole," I stated the obvious, trying to ground myself. "Parts of me are," it replied. "The parts we needed. The rest is something older." I raised the gun higher. "Stay back." It smiled, revealing teeth that hadn't been visible before. Too many, too sharp. "We've been patient. We let you leave last time because we weren't finished with the others. But now we are. Now it's your turn." I fired the revolver. The sound was deafening in the winter stillness. The thing wearing Cole's face jerked backward but didn't fall. Where the bullet struck its shoulder, the flannel shirt tore open to reveal not blood and tissue, but something dark and fibrous, like wet wood. It looked down at the wound with mild curiosity. "That won't work here. Nothing from your world works here the way you think it should."
From the surrounding forest came sounds of movement, branches snapping, undergrowth rustling, not from one direction but from all around, closing in. I fired again, this time aiming for what passed as its head. The bullet struck true, and for a moment the thing's form destabilized, flickering like a bad television signal. Cole's features dissolving into something I couldn't comprehend. Then it reformed, the wound already sealing itself. "You should run now," it suggested, almost kindly. "We enjoy the chase. Your friends did too for a while." I ran. I fled not toward the ledge and escape, but deeper into the forest, toward the coordinates from Cole's text. Something in me knew that running towards safety was exactly what they expected, what they wanted. The chase was part of their ritual, their feeding pattern, so I ran toward danger instead, hoping to disrupt whatever plan they had in motion. The forest changed as I moved deeper, trees growing closer together, their bark blackened as if by fire, though no fire had been reported in this region for decades. The ground beneath my feet transitioned from frozen soil to something spongier, almost membranous. I tried not to think about what I might be running across. Behind me, the pursuit continued. Multiple entities moving through the forest with unnatural speed and coordination. They made no attempt at stealth now, crashing through undergrowth and calling to each other with sounds no human throat could produce. My lungs burned, my legs threatened to buckle, but terror drove me forward, deeper into the heart of whatever aberration had claimed this section of forest. I reached the exact coordinates from Cole's message as the last daylight faded. What I found there defied explanation. A perfect clearing that couldn't have formed naturally. Trees surrounded it in a geometrically precise circle. At the center stood the crude shelter we'd discovered months ago, but transformed. It had grown. The original plywood structure now formed just one wall of a larger construction that incorporated living trees, their trunks bent and fused into impossible shapes to create a cathedral-like space beneath. The tarp roof had been replaced with a canopy of interwoven branches that pulsed slightly as if respiring. Most disturbing were the photographs. Hundreds, perhaps thousands of them covering every surface. Polaroids, digital prints, ancient sepia-toned images, all showing people in this forest. Some dated back decades based on the clothing styles. Some were recent enough to show modern hiking gear. In many, the subjects looked directly at the camera, expressions ranging from confusion to terror. And moving among these images were shapes not quite human, not quite animal, that seemed to shift and blur when viewed directly. They tended the photographs like gardeners, caring for plants, occasionally removing one from the wall and carrying it deeper into the structure. I crouched behind a fallen log, watching this incomprehensible scene unfold. My pursuers had fallen silent, but I knew they were still coming. This place, this structure, was clearly their destination, their home. As my eyes adjusted to the growing darkness, I noticed something at the center of the shelter. A device that seemed jarringly out of place in this organic nightmare. A camera, not digital but an old Polaroid, mounted on what might have been a tripod fashioned from bone and sinew. Beside it lay a pile of objects I recognized with growing horror. Jason's watch, Cole's pocket knife, my own lost hat that had disappeared during our trip. Personal items taken from dozens, perhaps hundreds of victims over who knows how many years. I understood then, in a moment of clarity that felt like breaking through ice into freezing water. They didn't just take people, they collected them, preserved them somehow in these endless photographs. The camera wasn't just a tool, it was the center of whatever ritual they performed. My revolver had 3 bullets remaining, not enough to fight whatever these entities were, but perhaps enough for what I needed to do.
I waited until the shambling figures moved to the far side of the clearing, then sprinted toward the center of the shelter. The ground beneath my feet felt warm and yielding, like flesh rather than soil. I reached the camera, aimed my revolver at it point blank, and fired twice. The Polaroid exploded in a spray of plastic metal and something dark that might have been blood. A scream tore through the forest, not from any single entity, but from the forest itself. The trees shuddered, the ground convulsed. Photographs began falling from the walls, their images melting and running like wax. The figures turned toward me, their forms fluctuating wildly between human appearance and something else, something with too many limbs, too many eyes, proportions that violated the laws of geometry. I fired my final bullet into the pile of personal effects, hitting something that sparked and caught fire. The flame spread unnaturally fast, engulfing the center of the shelter in seconds. As the fire grew, the entities became more substantial, more visible, as if the flames revealed their true nature. What I saw in that firelight broke something in my mind. They had never been human, never been animals. They were something else entirely. Ancient intelligences that had learned to mimic life forms but never quite mastered the subtleties. The largest of them lurched toward me, its form settling briefly into a grotesque approximation of coal. Beneath the familiar features, I glimpsed something vast and incomprehensible, a consciousness that had existed in these woods long before humans arrived, feeding on fear and memory and identity. "You cannot unmake us," it said in Cole's voice. "We are bound to this place." "I don't need to unmake you," I replied, backing toward the edge of the clearing. "I just need people to know you exist." From my pocket, I pulled my phone, not dead as I'd led them to believe, but recording everything since I'd entered the clearing. I'd live-streamed the entire encounter to a private server, insurance in case I didn't make it out. The creature wearing Cole's face recoiled as if physically struck. "Others have tried to expose us. Their evidence never survives." "Technology changes," I said. "You don't." With that, I turned and ran for the ledge, for escape, for whatever normal life might remain possible after what I'd witnessed. Behind me, the fire continued spreading, consuming the unnatural structure and the thousands of photographs it contained. I never looked back. I didn't need to. I could feel them pursuing, their rage, their hunger, their ancient confusion at being exposed to the modern world. But they didn't catch me. Perhaps they couldn't leave their territory. Perhaps the fire weakened them. Perhaps my knowledge of their existence gave me some power they couldn't overcome. I reached my car just as full darkness descended, drove straight to the nearest town and collapsed in a motel room. The live stream had worked. Grainy, dark, but clear enough to show the structure, the photographs, the fire. Not clear enough to show the creatures in detail, which was perhaps a mercy. That was 2 years ago. I've moved 4 times since then, changing my name, my appearance, my entire life. The live stream I captured went viral briefly before being dismissed as an elaborate hoax. Experts pointed out the impossibilities in the structure I'd filmed, the way physics seemed to work differently in that clearing. Some suggested advanced CGI. Others claimed I'd used actors and practical effects. Only a few believed, mostly families of those who had disappeared in those woods over the decades. They recognized items belonging to their loved ones in my footage. They contacted me, shared stories of similar experiences, of photographs arriving from impossible locations, of being watched by something that moved just at the edge of vision. The official investigation found nothing. Rangers and police searched the area I identified, but discovered no
No shelter, no scorched clearing, no evidence of the massive fire I described. The forest appeared untouched, primeval. They labeled my story a hoax, possibly motivated by guilt over abandoning my friends during a camping trip gone wrong. Jason and Cole remain officially missing. Their families have given up hope for their return. Sometimes I dream of them, not as they were, but as they became. Parts of them incorporated into something older and hungrier than humanity was ever meant to encounter. I keep moving because sometimes I still hear that wet, labored breathing outside my window at night. Sometimes I find photographs in my mailbox, images of me sleeping, eating, working, with no postmark or return address. Sometimes my phone captures strange distortions in the background of selfies. Tall, thin figures with proportions that shouldn't exist. I've stopped deleting these images. Instead, I collect them, studying them for patterns or meanings I might have missed. The entities in the forest collected photographs as a way of collecting people, their memories, their connections, perhaps even their souls. I don't know if my live stream weakened them or merely angered them. I don't know if burning their collection released their victims or simply destroyed evidence of their existence. What I do know is this: the forest is still there. Whispering Ridge still waits for hikers to stumble across its unnatural clearing. And whatever hungers there is patient, ancient enough to wait decades for revenge, intelligent enough to adapt its methods to a changing world. So, I keep moving, keep watching. I've installed cameras in every corner of my current apartment. I sleep with a weapon within reach. I avoid forests entirely. And if you're reading this, consider it a warning. If you're ever hiking and find a clearing that seems too perfect, a campsite with a fire ring already prepared, or a ledge that must be climbed to reach an isolated spot, turn back. Some parts of our world were never meant for human habitation. Some entities we were never meant to encounter. They're still hungry. They're still collecting. And sometimes, on nights when the wind blows just right, I swear I can hear them breathing just outside my door, waiting for me to let down my guard. God help me.
You've just witnessed the first tale from Dark Story Chronicles. If the darkness didn't scare you away, subscribe and step deeper into the unknown, because the next story might find you.